The subcommittee on energy will now come to order. The chair recognizes him. Will the witnesses please take their seat at the table? Will the witnesses please take their seat at the table? We want to welcome all our witnesses to this inaugural hearing of the 116th Congress, and we're delighted to see our witnesses here. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Once again, I would like to welcome everyone here today. I really want to once again welcome our witnesses. You brighten up the room here, and we certainly thank you for your attendance and the sacrifice of your time. I'm truly excited to hold this morning's hearings focusing on H.R. 1315, the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act. We have an excellent panel of majority and minority witnesses who represent many of the same diverse groups that this bill is designed to reach. While I am eager to hear from all of our guests, please allow me this great pleasure to acknowledge Ms. Ann Pramaggiore, who's here representing one of the most forward-looking utilities in the nation, Exelon, based out of one of the most forward-looking cities in the nation, my great home city of Chicago, that on yesterday had an election, and for the first time in history, nominated 2 African-American women to be in the runoff for election as mayor of the city of Chicago. I must say that right from the outset, I want to make it clear that the bill that we have before us today should be viewed as a work in progress. I am pleased that so many stakeholders have reached out to my office up to and including this very moment that this hearing is commencing. My objective is to continue to work with and incorporate constructive feedback from as many organizations that truly share my goal of putting Americans back to work. And let me be as frank as possible. My primary and sole objective is exactly that, putting as many American citizens to work in good-paying energy and manufacturing jobs as humanly and legislatively possible. The substance of this bill has not changed since the bill was passed through the full committee and through the House, under Republican control, I might add, with overwhelming bipartisan support over the last 2 Congresses. However, what we have heard time and time again throughout these last few years is that we were not always able to truly help the very same individuals that this bill was designed to reach. Many potential candidates from low-income homes and minority communities, women who serve as heads of households, returning veterans, out-of-work coal and other energy workers were not always able to take advantage of training programs. These individuals have stressed to me that they needed assistance just to enroll in these facilities. Additionally, many of these very same candidates were not able to leave one low-paying job or even give up their job searches simply because they couldn't afford to go through the training if they were not getting paid as they worked to advance their careers. This is just the reality of many of the candidates that this bill is designed to reach. And this is also the reason why we needed to beef up this legislation with actual resources and assistance to help these American citizens. So I truly hope that moving forward, we can once again, for the third time, make this a bipartisan bill. My office is eager, willing, and anxious to work with any member on this subcommittee or beyond to address any legislative concerns and put forward legislation that would hit the mark and help put hundreds or even thousands of hardworking Americans back to work in good-paying jobs and careers. And once again, I want to thank all of our distinguished witnesses for being here today. And now I would like to call on my friend and colleague from my neighboring state, the great state of Michigan, Ranking Member Upton, for his opening statement.
I like that great state of Michigan, but even better, I like being called your friend because, in fact, we are. We've been very good friends for a long, long time and share many, many things together. Mr. Chairman, I do thank you for holding this hearing to continue our efforts on the workforce development. This hearing marks the first in the Energy Subcommittee under your chairmanship, and I look forward to working very closely with you and your staff and members on both sides of the aisle. I want to welcome our newest member on the Republican side, Catherine Morris Rogers, to our subcommittee. Mr. Chairman, I'm confident that we can continue our long history of bipartisan cooperation and set aside some of our differences. Working together, we've delivered some very big wins. Some would call them huge for the American people over the years, and I remain hopeful that we'll continue in that tradition. Since our first hearing is billed as a legislative hearing, I should note that under my chairmanship of the committee, we strive for regular order. In fact, you'll remember that we moved your workforce legislation in the 114th Congress to promote a 21st century energy and manufacturing workforce with both background and legislative hearings and markups. We worked together again in the last Congress, the 115th, to pass a bill a second time, the same bill a second time by unanimous consent in the committee and also on the House floor. Sadly, the Senate didn't get it done, but that doesn't mean that we can't keep trying. I hope, and I would take you at your word, that this hearing doesn't start a precedent of rushing to move new legislation without thorough analysis and oversight. This new bill was just sprung on us last week, and we haven't had much of an opportunity to work with you. But I remain open-minded, and I have serious concerns that this legislation unfairly picks winners and losers and has the potential to waste valuable taxpayer dollars. My colleagues and I on this side of the aisle were pleased to support your bill last Congress because it did take an all-of-the-above approach that recognized the benefits of reliable, affordable, and plentiful energy jobs and manufacturing competitiveness. We both made some compromise, and in fact, we found a sweet spot. I'm afraid that this bill strays from our bipartisan agreement from last Congress. It appears that it simply recycles the failed Obama administration green jobs agenda by promising nearly $1 billion of new spending to retrain workers for the so-called green jobs. The record has shown that the Obama green jobs agenda did waste billions of dollars and failed to deliver on its promises. There are many lessons learned, and we should take our time to get this one right, rather than repeat the mistakes of the past, and I look forward to working together on that. I especially look forward to hearing from our witnesses today so that we can better understand the needs and opportunities for expanding private sector workforce development initiatives to improve diversity in the energy and manufacturing industries. I believe that we both share a desire to expand opportunities for minorities, for women, and certainly our veterans in the energy industry, although that we may differ on the strategy to accomplish that goal. Today, we're going to hear from witnesses representing veterans and women in the types of traditional energy jobs that would be unfairly excluded by the legislation before us. I would ask that you listen to the voices of those who work in nuclear, fossil, energy, and manufacturing industries and open this process up so that, in fact, that it is more transparent and inclusive. We should also receive testimony from the Department of Energy and incorporate the lessons learned from the Green Jobs Program before rushing to move this bill. I remain hopeful that these important workforce development issues don't get bogged down in partisan politics, as we've done in the past. When we give all sides an opportunity to participate and adhere to regular order, there is no limit in terms of what we can achieve. The bipartisan bills we passed into law last Congress are prime examples. We streamlined the licensing process for renewable hydropower projects. We promoted zero-emissions nuclear energy. We amended the Federal Power Act to provide more transparency on electric rates for consumers, and we advanced solutions to modernize our infrastructure and harden our grid. There's a lot that needs to be done this Congress, and Republicans are certainly eager to go to work. We're going to continue to put consumers first in everything that we do as we propose solutions to encourage technological innovation in energy, ensure a sound regulatory environment, promote American workforce development, and foster free markets and competition. With that, I look forward to working with you in this Congress, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, and your comments will be considered. The chair now recognizes Mr. Malone, chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rush. Today we're discussing Chairman Rush's Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act of 2019. For many years, Chairman Rush has been Congress's champion for developing a more diverse and robust energy workforce, and I commend him for his longtime commitment to this important effort. As we approach the end of Black History Month, this hearing is an important opportunity to look at the diversity gaps in the energy industry, why they're occurring, and what we can do to make the industry more inclusive. Minorities are significantly underrepresented in the science, technology, engineering, and math or STEM fields. African Americans and Hispanics represent 27% of the overall nationwide workforce, but only make up 16% of the STEM workforce. And it's not just a question of minorities being underrepresented in STEM fields. There's also an earnings gap for minority workers who hold these jobs. The average African American STEM worker earns 81% of the salary of a white STEM worker, while a woman holding a STEM job makes just 72% of the salary of the average man. So preparing workers for the energy jobs of the future through training and educational opportunities can help narrow this unacceptable gap. Chairman Rush's legislation takes important steps to bridge the diversity gaps that currently exist in the energy sector. The bill establishes a comprehensive nationwide program at the Department of Energy to improve education and training for jobs in energy-related industries. The legislation provides DOE new authority to offer direct assistance to schools, workforce development boards, and labor organizations. And the bill also establishes a grant program to provide funds to businesses to pay employees who are receiving training to work in the renewable energy, energy efficiency, or grid modernization sectors. And these are areas critically important in our efforts to combat climate change. Chairman Rush has been working on this bill since the 113th Congress. Previous versions have enjoyed strong bipartisan support, including last Congress when a version of the bill passed the House on a voice vote. In the 114th Congress, Republicans included his bill in the base text of the North American Energy Security and Infrastructure Act, a broad energy bill introduced by then full committee chairman Fred Upton. So I commend my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for recognizing the importance of this legislation and the issues it addresses. The energy workforce in our country is growing, particularly in the area of wind energy, energy efficiency, and grid modernization. Our challenge is to ensure the appropriate training and educational opportunities are available to workers who can fill these jobs. And at the same time, we must develop policies to provide opportunities for minorities and underrepresented groups to expand their participation in the energy workforce. It's also important that we ensure participation in both the traditional energy sector and the rapidly growing clean energy and efficiency sectors. And the goal is to have an energy workforce that reflects the demographics of the country as a whole. And this bill puts us on the pathway to achieving that objective. So again, I thank the chairman and I yield back.
I want to thank the chairman of the full committee, and now the chair now recognizes Mr. Hudson, who has been given Mr. Walden, the ranking member of the full committee's time. So the chair now recognizes Mr. Hudson of North Carolina for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, let me say congratulations to you on your chairmanship of this subcommittee. I'm optimistic that that together we can do big things. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on energy workforce development, an important issue for me and the constituents I represent back home in North Carolina. I'd also like to thank Mr. James Simpson, a 25-year Marine Corps veteran and North Carolinian, for appearing before us today on behalf of Pike Enterprises, who's headquartered in Mount Airy, North Carolina, and has operations all across the country. Mr. Chairman, as already been mentioned, this is the first energy subcommittee of this Congress, and we're starting with a legislative hearing on a bill that you and I have worked together on over the past 2 Congresses. I was disappointed to learn that Republicans were cut out of the process this time around, and the bill was reintroduced with some major changes, including a new title and hundreds of millions of dollars in new spending. And Mr. Chairman, the bill text was released last Friday and not been made widely available. This is not regular order, and it's not the way I would have hoped to handle this bill, given our history of working together. I was also surprised to learn that the new language is not all of the above. In fact, it excludes fossil, nuclear, and manufacturing altogether. And we've worked hard to make sure the bills the last 2 Congresses were bipartisan, all of the above, and inclusive of all underrepresented groups in the energy industry, including minorities, women, and veterans. This new version falls well short of the agreement we've had in the last 2 Congresses. I look forward to working closely with you. I respect you, Mr. Chairman, and I trust you. But because Republicans were not included on this new draft, I'm afraid we're not putting our best foot forward. This is a legislative hearing, so we should also have an opportunity to hear from the appropriate Department of Energy representatives on their workforce development initiatives to ensure that this legislation doesn't unfairly pick winners or losers or add new layers of duplicative programs. Additionally, this legislation would amend the DOE Organization Act and establish a new office within the DOE. These are significant actions that warrant examination through a full and complete legislative process. Now, even if the way we got here today is disappointing, I will try to keep an open mind because we owe it to our constituents to put aside our differences and work together. With that said, I look forward to receiving testimony from our witnesses today and gathering feedback from the Department of Energy and additional legislative hearings. If you're willing, as you said in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman, to make this a bipartisan effort, I would also look forward to offering constructive solutions to get this bill back on track. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to say to Mr. Hudson, I look forward to working with you, and I want to, just for the record, to be clear, the staffs on the Republican side received this copy of the bill last Wednesday, not Friday. So we want to give you ample time to prepare for this hearing. And so it was last Wednesday. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. And now, once again, it's my great pleasure and distinct honor to introduce our diverse panel of witnesses for today's hearing. They're not well, I'm going to start with from my left and your right, Mr. Gilbert C. Campbell III, who is the co-founder of Vote Energy. And seated next to Mr. Gilbert is Ms. Katie Wardhall Maynard, the founder and chief executive officer of Pink Petrol and Experience Energy. I think I got that right. And then next to Ms. Maynard is Ms. Vianne Trombe, who is the president of Dream Corps, all right? And next to Ms. Trombe is Mr. James Simpson, who is the manager of military talent acquisition at Pike Enterprises, LLC. And then next is Ms. Letitia Colon Niemenhaus, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Energy Efficiency Solutions, LLC. And finally, once again, Ms. Ann Parmigiori, the Senior Executive Vice President and CEO of Exelon Utilities, which is headquartered in my home state of Illinois. And now we will have, first of all, I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us today, and we look forward to your testimony. At this time, we will now recognize each member, each witness rather, for 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. Before we begin, I would like to explain the lighting system. In front of you is a series of lights. The lights will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. Please begin to wrap up your testimony at the point of the yellow light. The light will turn red when your time expires. Our first witness today is Mr. Gilbert G. Campbell III, the co-founder of Volt Energy. Mr. Campbell, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the committee, I am truly honored to be here today to testify on the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act of 2019. My name is Gilbert Campbell. I am the co-founder of Volt Energy, a national renewable energy development firm that finances, develops, and builds solar energy, microgrid, electric vehicle charging station projects for governmental, educational, commercial, and nonprofit institutions. Our mission as a company is to uplift communities through the opportunities and benefits that are provided by clean technology. Some of our notable clients include the Cheesecake Factory, Subaru, Pepco, Howard University, Wake Forest University, KIPP Charter Schools, and the District of Columbia government. We are at an exciting time in American history, where our energy infrastructure is being modernized real-time by clean technology. America's transition to a cleaner, advanced, and more resilient energy infrastructure is a key driver of job growth that will forever change the fabric of this wonderful nation. The renewable energy sector currently employs 770,000 people, roughly the same as the U.S. telecommunications industry. Solar and wind jobs outnumber coal and gas jobs in 30 states, including the District of Columbia. Last year, energy storage jobs surged to over 90,000. Grid modernization efforts have created more than 55,000 jobs, and there are 174,000 Americans who develop and manufacture electric vehicles currently. As you can see, clean energy is one of our nation's fastest growing sectors, and the transition from blue-collar jobs to green-collar jobs should not be viewed as a blue issue or Democratic issue or a red or Republican issue. Rather, it should be viewed as a red, white, and blue opportunity for our nation to modernize our energy infrastructure while providing good-paying jobs and wealth creation opportunities for all Americans. I am a strong supporter of this bill for the following reasons. Number one, in order to achieve our clean energy goals, we need a talented, trained, and diverse workforce. Number two, given our nation's history, we need to remedy the disproportionate negative impact of energy policies on diverse communities and double down our investments in those communities. We have already seen the impact of these policies nationally, and this bill will enhance and scale the impactful efforts to ensure that all Americans benefit from the growth of clean energy. In order for us to accomplish the goals set forth in this bill, it's critical that we make investments in workforce development training through STEM programs that cultivate the untapped but abundant talent that resides in our underrepresented communities and our rural communities. As I mentioned before, we also must be honest that our country's aging energy infrastructure was built at the expense of minority and rural communities. Our country has picked losers. For example, studies show that 71% of African Americans live in counties that violate federal air pollution standards, and nearly 70% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal power plant. African American children are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma and 7.1 times more likely to die from asthma than white children. While the coal industry is rapidly declining, the incidences of premature deaths continue to rise, amounting to over 50,000 deaths per year. As we transition to a cleaner infrastructure, it is only equitable that minorities, women, veterans, the disabled, returning citizens, and other marginalized Americans must be given the opportunity to thrive in a clean energy economy that received $333.5 billion in global investments in 2017. Here in the District of Columbia, Mayor Bowser and regional utilities, PEPCO, WGL Energy, and others have supported things like the DC Infrastructure Academy, where the mission is to train a diverse and underrepresented workforce. Additionally, I serve on the board of the Energy Advisory Board of the Fonterey Community Enrichment Center that serves low-income residents in DC. In a community stricken by extreme poverty, high employment, and high incarceration rates, we were able to launch a solar training program, enrolled 71 students, but more importantly, employed 48 of those students into full-time jobs. My company is also developing numerous solar installations at Howard University, one of our nation's most prominent historically black colleges and universities, where we also are working with each school and university to make sure our future leaders and students are learning the career paths in alternative energy. In closing, I support this bill because it would help us to achieve our clean energy goals and restore our standing as a global leader in energy, remedy the wrongs of our past, and continue to enhance the lives of all Americans around the country. Thank you for my time.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Upton, committee members, and fellow witnesses, my name is Katie Maynard, and I'm the founder and CEO of Pink Petro and Experience Energy. It is an honor here today to be with you to have my 8-year-old daughter, Allie Reese Maynard, present to see what's possible for women in America. After 2 decades of working for global oil and gas companies, notably Shell and BP, in safety, environment, and culture change, I left the corporate path to become an entrepreneur to fill unmet needs I saw in our workforce. Pink Petro was working on 4 fronts to address the gap. We help women inside the sector network to understand career paths and connect to role models. We funded the nonprofit mentoring program Lean In Energy to provide mentors for women across the energy value chain. We are marketing the energy industry through personal storytelling, career opportunities on our Experience Energy careers site with the aim to attract new recruits, women, minorities, and millennials for all forms. We help companies to shape culture by bringing peers together to learn from each other. My company and our community of members believe that it is critical we bring all forms of energy and talent together to look at the workforce of the future to make necessary investments to position America to take a leading role in the global energy transition. I launched Pink Petro in 2015 amidst a sharp drop in crude prices. Our community connects oil and gas members to share around best practices and storytelling. We have a website, we have an app, and we also have a global corporate community council, which provides a neutral platform for dialogue and actions to address gender equality and inclusive culture. In January of 2016, when oil plummeted to $29, the World Economic Forum and 22 oil and gas and energy CEOs publicly published a call to action to end the gender gap. Pink Petro gathered stakeholders and prepared a response and action plan for consideration that you can look at on our website. After extensive research, we determined that oil and gas is not the only part of the sector with projected job growth, as well as gender and minority gaps. We're extending our community council presently to connect with other energy firms and utilities, renewables, and diversity organizations to develop a wider network of resources to address these gaps together. In 2017, when we launched Experience Energy, a career site geared at helping energy companies to connect to diverse candidates, my thought and vision is we need to educate new recruits on the exciting benefits and social impact one can achieve and a career in energy. In 2018, in an effort to address those mentoring needs at scale, Pink Petro, Hess Corporation, Emerson, FedEx Corporation, Worley Parsons, and Vantage Energy supported the formation of a nonprofit, Lean In Energy, which uses technology to match mentors across the world and across all forms of energy. This work is all addressing opportunities the industry faces in creating a diverse workforce. First, we need to make the industry a more highly sought-after career choice. Billions of people are being lifted out of low incomes and helping to drive economic growth and the demand for energy. And the transition to a lower carbon energy system is opening up a wide range of economic possibilities. These are all reasons to involve women and underrepresented populations. Second, we need to increase understanding around the diversity of jobs and skill sets. There's a mindset in America that everyone needs a four-year college degree. While that is desirable, it is not necessary. Workforce development programs in welding, electronics, technical operations, safety go unfilled because of the perception of these roles. The Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act of 2019 recognizes these needs and the government role. I agree with the recommendation to language develop a comprehensive and detailed understanding of the workforce skills needed in the energy-related industries. Finally, diversity is critical to energy, but we need to be inclusive and work across all forms and all people. It truly is the use case for diversity and inclusion, the energy sector. I'm very happy that you, as leaders in Congress, are looking to take action and welcome any questions you have. However, for us to accelerate this work, we must work together, join forces, all aspects of energy, and all people to progress. Thank you for having me a part of this discussion.
I want to thank you, Ms. Bernard. Is Alice in the room? Is Alice?
Allie.
Allie, is she in the room? I want to recognize.
She's sleeping.
She's sleeping, okay.
She actually was having a meltdown right as we were starting. So
Maybe we should have a few more opening statements from here.
From members there, absolutely. All right, now we will recognize Ms. Trong. Ms. Trong.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee for this hearing. My name is Vianne Trung. I am the president of the Dream Corps, and here on behalf of Green for All, our national initiative, we're working to build an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. We're facing two major crises in this country, poverty and pollution, and for too long we've thought about and addressed these issues separately. Developing programs and tackling our economic and environmental issues in separate silos, even though they have been deeply connected. And that has been a problem, because low-income communities are hit first and worst by pollution. It's for many reasons. Our proximity to pollution, our increased vulnerability to climate disasters, our increased costs because of increased living resulting from scarce resources. It is for this reason that working families stand to gain the most from moving towards a cleaner and more sustainable economy. As a mom of 6-year-old twins, I have fought for policies and programs that have prioritized families, the economy, and the environment for over a decade. Our team at Green for All have launched a Moms Mobilize campaign where we mobilize hundreds of thousands of moms to lobby to protect the Environmental Protection Agency, to unify the country around the health, safety, and security of our kids and our families and our communities. Thankfully, the EPA's budget was secured because people across this country stood up. And we did so because we understood the EPA's main reasons to protect our health and children are top priority, but also that protecting the environment and supporting our economy are not contradictory. The clean energy sector is a pool for potential job growth, larger than any other in the United States. As we heard earlier from Mr. Campbell, we can already see this growth in both the solar and the wind power industries. Solar panel installations and wind turbine technician jobs are increasing at a faster rate in this country than most others. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, jobs in the solar industry increased by 24% between 2015 and 2017 alone, while the rest of the economy experienced only a 2% job growth rate. In 2017, the solar employment expanded 17 times faster than any other industry. If we invest in clean and renewable energy, We can and will protect this planet, our families, our future, and we can revamp our economy at the same time, creating millions of jobs. Investing in clean and renewable energy means investing in a new job market, including jobs to retrofit existing buildings, meet increased energy efficiency standards of new buildings, and install, manufacture solar panels, wind turbines, and other needed materials. These jobs have the potential to pay good wages, provide benefits that helps working families meet ends, and to help improve health outcomes by advancing renewable and energy efficiency sectors. These new jobs have the potential to employ workers in places where bias have been prominent, where we see exclusion and sustained disinvestment that has been producing communities with concentrated poverty. To reach our goals of a clean energy economy, we have to challenge the two problems of job access and job quality. We must ensure that our investments results in robust, fulfilling, and career-oriented job pathways. We must take proper measures to prevent low-quality, seasonal, or temporary jobs that fail frontline communities and fossil fuel workers, too. A transition to a clean energy economy has to mean a just transition, including uplifting those most impacted by fossil fuels and most in need of well-paying, secure jobs. Finding and training the workers are going to have to begin long before the jobs are filled. That process must begin with our young people, our students. We must begin developing the job skills and a career pathway now. And that's what this bill will help to do, helping to make sure that traditional and non-traditional educational platforms, ensuring that energy-oriented skill sets become fiscally, educationally, and culturally accessible. Apprenticeship and internship programs have to provide opportunities for young people to begin these job skills processes early and to gain mentors, compensation, and career visioning in the process. This bill is going to help us do that by outreaching to minority-serving institutions, nonprofit organizations, and state and local organizations at the same time. I'm here because we have to begin transitioning to a new energy economy, and as we do so, we must develop and bring on new communities at the same time. Our communities depend on it across the country. We're facing an economic and environmental peril, and this is the time for bold leadership for us to take America forward to a more cleaner and sustainable future, and supporting this act will help to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Simpson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to participate in today's hearing and allowing me the opportunity to discuss Pike's initiatives in hiring underrepresented populations into the energy sector, and in particular, our commitment to hiring and training veterans to join the energy field. My name is James Simpson. I'm Manager of Military Talent Acquisition at Pike Corporation. Pike Corporation is a privately owned and operated business founded in 1945. The principal business of the company is power line construction, both overhead and underground, and maintenance, gas line construction, and also engineering. Pike offers turnkey solutions for customers, and our customers range from the largest energy producers in the country to the smaller local cooperative utilities. In my opinion, this hearing is perfectly timed. Today's market, we're seeing about a 14% growth in the industry, resulting in a need of several thousand new employees annually for the foreseeable future to keep up with demand. As a lot of other industries today, the energy sector has struggled to find willing and able employees to fill the thousands of current openings throughout the country, let alone the thousands of new jobs I just referenced that will be needed on an annual basis. The jobs at Pike are hard work. There can be long days, and most work is done outside. One of the biggest things we're known for, you all here in Northern Virginia are probably familiar with seeing our blue and white trucks out in the community after storms. We do storm restoration work. When citizens are speeding out of the path of a hurricane or an incoming storm, our crews are rushing in to face that crisis and battle the storm and restore your power as quickly as possible. Pike realized not long ago that our retention rate for veteran employees was higher than our non-veteran retention rates. We studied deeper. We realized that our veteran population was an untapped pool of diverse talent, carrying the same vision and work ethic as our primary workforce today. They desire to serve others. They desire to run headlong into the face of adversity, and the ability to desire to work in teams are all fundamental tenets of our workforce. Many veterans bring out of the military with them that desire, that need to serve others. I was honored with the opportunity to spend 25 years as a Marine and recently retired from the military service. I was approached by Pike and hired in July of 2018 with the sole purpose of expanding our outreach, training, and ultimate hiring of our nation's veterans. While there's a lot of confusion and naivety about what exactly a lineman is or what the skills are that are required, linemen are very intelligent people. They have to have math skills, the STEM skills that we've talked about today, in order to perform their jobs. Identifying the type of transformers and fuses that are required, the type of wire, the gauge of wire used to deliver the electricity from production to your home or business is critical, and they have to have the knowledge to know how to work with those things. Pike has developed and been approved to administer a Department of Labor Veterans Apprenticeship Program. Our apprenticeship program allows new employees to enroll in the program, document their work history and training toward attaining a journeyman level certificate or credential. Veterans with GI Bill benefits are eligible to draw a housing allowance from their GI Bill while they participate in the program. Some of those veterans also use their military apprenticeship program skills from their service in the military to boost their performance in our program. Pike is a participating member of a group called the Center for Energy Workforce Development. CEWD has developed a career roadmap for veterans to identify a path into the energy industry. So we have a roadmap, they have a jobs database, we have access to the jobs. It's simply gaining access to the service members. In our talent acquisition program, we go to all of the military installations. We engage the service members as they're in their transition process. And what we run into is differing rules and regulations to access that transitioning workforce as they leave the military and enter the civilian workforce. What we run into is each base has their own criteria for gaining access. We also work with the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has programs such as WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which allows us funding to train service members for jobs. The issue we run into is that workforce development boards determine how that funding is used in each local area. So some states have a workforce development board. In other areas, in North Carolina, for instance, we have 23 workforce development boards determining how to use the funds for our programs. You can see with 23 different groups setting rules on their own in individual regions how hard it would be to access that funding. Community college programs are often continuing education programs and therefore aren't allowed in some of these other programs because they're not curriculum developing. So resolving those issues would be key. We also work with the DoD Skill Bridge program. DoD Skill Bridge allows service members to train while they're leaving the military, which is a great benefit to us because we can get some access to their services and skills. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
I want to thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Dee Mayhas for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement.
Honorable Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the subcommittee, I'm Leticia Colon de Mejias of Energy Efficiency Solutions, Policy Co-Chair of the Home Performance Coalition. I founded Energy Efficiency Solutions in 2010 in Windsor, Connecticut. My company has completed weatherization and comprehensive energy efficiency upgrades to over 12,000 Connecticut homes and over 10 million square feet of multifamily housing. In addition, we've served churches, schools, and municipalities and reduced energy demand and consumption in those buildings and communities. As the policy co-chair of the Home Performance Coalition, I help to identify policies and opportunities to advance the energy efficiency and home performance industries. We create local and well-paying jobs across every state in the nation while simultaneously making our building stock more efficient, safe, and comfortable and affordable by reducing the energy bills for millions of Americans and businesses. In addition to my work in the building science and energy sector, I have also worked as a workforce consultant for 22 years. I've been the recipient of national awards for the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. And I have worked in engaging urban and minority populations in STEM education as it relates to energy literacy, civic engagement, and fiscal responsibility. I have personally trained over 150 people for jobs in the green industry in relationship to efficiency and renewable resources. I am honored to be here to testify in front of you today in support of the Blue Collar and Green Collar Job Development Act of 2019. As a female minority contractor and a small business owner, I am here to tell you that the energy efficiency doesn't have a jobs problem. We have lots of jobs to fill. The problem that we have is finding workforce that are ready and trained and certified to work in our industry. Efficiency, while not as sexy as solar and wind, is simply efficient. It gets the job done. and conservation is simply a conservative way to reduce our energy demands and lower bills for all Americans. We need the resources to help train our existing employees and to keep them up to date on their certifications and technologies and health and safety measures to make America's building stock great. What we need is a comprehensive nationwide program to improve education for the workers in efficiency and clean energy industries, including manufacturing, engineering, construction, and building retrofits. This is exactly what the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Initiative would do. The energy efficiency and renewable energy industries represents a growing workforce, and in 2018, the Energy Efficiency Jobs in America, the E for the Future report, reports that over 2.25 million Americans work in the energy efficiency industry. Efficiency is literally the fastest growing job sector, adding new jobs which outnumber elementary and middle school teachers nearly double, and double the law enforcement officers that we have. More importantly, these jobs are local and cannot be outsourced, and 99% of U.S. counties have energy efficiency jobs. We have a real need to ramp up the implementation of workforce programs and prepare career changers like myself, women and veterans that I employ, and underrepresented minority and at-risk populations for the jobs that exist already today. We need to fill these roles to meet our nation's demand for reliable and resilient energy production. I have served as the policy co-chair for the Connecticut Workforce Consortium for 5 years. In this role, I've heard countless business owners explain the difficulties in hiring staff without proper credentials and training to work in this industry. Many of these businesses are small. In fact, the majority of efficiency businesses across the country have fewer than 20 employees. I myself employ 22. These small businesses are the backbone of our country, and they're the ones that are in need of assistance when it comes to making new hires and investing in education and training for these employees and incumbent workers. One of the main pillars of the Blue to Green Collar Jobs Act is an energy workforce grant program, which will provide assistance to businesses seeking to educate and train new hires or help existing employees move into higher level jobs. By covering the wages for these workers during the time they're receiving training, the program will significantly help small and medium-sized businesses invest in their employees. These are considered OJT training funding jobs, and I have personally myself participated in these programs and hired people. I have some people who still work for me 10 years later. On a particular importance, I am pleased to present this legislation, which gives priority to businesses who recruit employees from local communities, minority groups, women, and veterans. These are often hardest working people in our society, and they have already vested interest in bettering their communities. With the proper training, they can excel to positions in our economy and get off of things like subsidy. But we need to do this broadly as a nation. In addition to helping the businesses invest in their employees, we need to take action to engage young people and today's youth, who will be tomorrow's workforce, in the STEM education fields. As a contractor, I have spent 22 years encouraging underrepresented groups and ethnic minorities and women to enter the science and technology, engineering, and math fields. Through the Green Eco Warriors, which I serve as a president and co-founder, I have helped over 10,000 children in over 100 United States schools participate in these programs. It is important that we continue mentorship and training to increase emerging clean energy and efficiency in our economy. We must work together nationally on these goals, and I fully support the objectives embodied in the Blue to Green Collar Jobs Act. The goals in this program included: will support economic growth and energy security in our nation, and we will enhance the ability of businesses to invest in employees, and when we invest in our youth and employees, we prepare them meaningfully to contribute to our economy and our nation, and that's a win for all of us. Thank you.
Now I recognize Ms. Parmajori for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Rush. Thank you for the warm welcome. Exelon's delighted to serve the great city of Chicago, as well as our other great cities and communities, including the District of Columbia now. Good morning, Congressman Upton and members of the committee. Exelon operates 6 utilities, is the largest operator of nuclear plants in the United States, and participates in retail energy markets in 48 states. I lead Exelon's 6 utilities, which deliver electricity and natural gas to approximately 10 million customers. We appreciate very much the opportunity to share our perspective today as your committee explores expanding opportunities in the energy field through the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Act. We see tremendous opportunity in our industry as we transform the electric grid for the 21st century, and we are enthusiastically committed to creating pathways for the diverse people of the communities we serve. The electric power industry is a major economic engine for America. In addition to its role supporting every other sector of the economy, electric power generates significant economic activity in its own right, providing some 2.7 million jobs and $880 billion of economic impact. This is a snapshot of our industry as it exists today, but this industry is anything but static. In fact, it's reinventing itself to the traditional tenets of reliable, safe, and affordable power. The advances of the 21st century require we add the features of clean, resilient, and connected to more and more devices and uses to meet the country's needs. This is nothing short of a transformation that will require both retooling our current workforce and cultivating a workforce of the future with new skills and talents. In the next 10 years, job requirements in the electric power industry will include a need for more engineers to design a new grid to accommodate solar, wind, storage, and other clean technologies, information technology experts, skilled high-voltage technicians who understand digital as well as analog technology, solar installers, wind turbine technicians, and energy efficiency experts and technicians. In other words, we need STEM workers, and increasingly we need skilled craft workers, particularly in clean energy. At Exelon, we're committed to diversity in our company and industry, and that commitment drove us to launch Chicago Construct, a unique job training program that increases skilled labor employment opportunities in the utility and construction arena for minorities in the Chicago region. More than 500 participants have completed the Construct program in its 6 years of existence, and 80% of those participants were offered jobs by our utility or other construction companies that work with us and participate in the program. Right here in Washington, PEPCO recently partnered with the district leadership to launch the DC Infrastructure Academy, similarly preparing district residents for well-paying careers in the electric utility industry. PECO has a similar program in Philadelphia in partnership with the community colleges for gas industry workers. Another aspect of our commitment to developing the workforce of the future is increasing educational opportunities for women and minorities in STEM fields. 6 years ago, we launched the Icebox Derby, a summer program in which teams of young ladies from our communities are given the engineering task of turning recycled refrigerators into electric race cars and racing them at the end of the summer project. Delmarva Power has worked with Delaware State to create a renewable engineering program, and BG&E in Baltimore has launched a successful internship program for high schoolers in Baltimore City. As we work to build the workforce of the future, we welcome the support offered in this bill. The national effort laid out in the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Act will help to ensure we have a diverse workforce with the right skill sets to help build this bold new energy future. Innovation of necessity requires diversity. A diverse group of people sharing ideas and innovating together is truly the 21st century's competitive edge. The transformation of this industry creates the need. The technical nature of the transformation means the jobs have a future. And the fact that this is occurring in the ubiquitous electric energy industry means the impacts will be seen in every U.S. community. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all the witnesses for their opening statement. We have now concluded opening statements, and now we will move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses. And I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Parmigiori, Exelon is one of the leading companies that have not only talked the talk, but have actually invested its own money and resources into making sure that there is diversity in the ranks of its skilled labor workforce. Thus, Exelon viewed the concept of training historically overlooked and underserved segments of the population, as our bill does, as solely a moral or social issue, or is it preparing qualified minority women, veterans, and other targeted candidates in a way that's for you is just good business sense.
Thank you, sir. At Exelon, we believe that diversity in our workforce is all of the above. It is the right thing to do for our communities, but it is also smart business. We are entering actually a knowledge-based economy. Innovation is the coin of the realm. It is what will allow our economy to excel in the future. You don't get innovation without diversity. If you put the same people in a room together who have the same perspective on the world, you're not going to create and innovate. And so we think it's critically important to have this diversity in our workforce. And when we think about innovation, it's not just about creating technology. It's about the very smart people, as Mr. Simpson indicated, who are out climbing poles and on the line, who can figure out a smarter, more efficient way to do something, to improve a process. So we need innovation in every part of our business, and we think diversity is crucial to that.
Stated in my opening statement, Exelon is one of the most forward-looking utilities in our nation, and you have you mentioned in your statement the connected communities of the future, which is located in my home district, and I look forward to highlighting this activity in this project. And you will host the nation's first microgrid cluster, if I'm not mistaken. And this project, the Connecting Community Project of the Future, will help examine the effectiveness of microgrids as a means for enhancing grid resiliency while also utilizing what you have termed to be community energy empowerment zones. Can you briefly discuss the concept of utilizing local talent, such as the Ideathon, where scholarships are awarded to prize winners in local schools as a way to foster excitement around energy and STEM fundamentals?
Yes, thank you. We view that our industry has not only technical and economic impacts, but social impacts as well. And we have a project in the Bronzeville neighborhood, south of the Loop in Chicago, to build the world's first microgrid cluster. We actually have a grant from the Department of Energy. We're building a microgrid, which is a small, self-sufficient grid. In the Bronzeville neighborhood, it will connect to a campus microgrid at Illinois Institute of Technology. The two microgrids will actually be able to dispatch generation back and forth, and it's a very new and innovative project. The idea is that if you have disruptions on the grid, you can actually isolate portions of the grid to make the grid more resilient. We looked at this project as very much an exciting technical project, but we also wanted to involve the community. So we worked in a number of different programs. We have a ride-sharing program for seniors, electric vehicles, partnered with an electric vehicle company to do that. We've used diverse engineering talent to help us design this microgrid from the local Chicago community. And we launched an ideathon at one of the local schools involving about 8 of the area high schools, bringing in high schoolers to form teams, working with teachers as well as ComEd and Exelon engineers to create projects and compete for scholarship money. So we've also created a curriculum at Dunbar High School around the microgrid. It's a 70-hour curriculum. So we're really looking to take this technical, exciting technical project that is occurring in the community and involve the whole community and be able to bring our kids into this new energy world.
My time is up. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of you for your testimony. There's no question that we need to increase STEM education. We know the real need to increase diversity, and we also know the opportunities that should be there as we look to jobs in the future and the need for qualified folks to be able to tackle those jobs and to earn good wages for their families. A couple questions, Mr. Simpson. I was prompted by your introduction. I know that your company Pike was not associated at all with whitefish, but there were a number of us on this committee on a bipartisan trip that went down to Puerto Rico shortly after the hurricane, and we saw firsthand the devastation that was there. I think we were all appalled by the lack of progress to really connect people back with the difficulties that I think still remain there. You talked a little bit about Pike being a company that works with putting lines underground as well, and I think for a number of us that witnessed what went on in Puerto Rico, this is going to probably happen again at some time in the future, and wouldn't it be a lot smarter to actually build these lines underground than having them exposed to the elements that we saw with the devastation that was there? Did you all actually do any underground work in trying to put Puerto Rico back together again as it related to the power structure there?
Sir, to my knowledge, no. We were rebuilding the grid that was already in existence, so we weren't doing modifications or changes necessarily.
Did anyone ask or did you all raise your paw and say, this is something that might be worthwhile to do?
I'm not aware, sir.
Okay. Maybe if you could come back to us.
Absolutely.
And I know this is a little bit was out of bounds from your testimony today. In your testimony, you gave an example about commercial driver's licenses where veterans could get a waiver based on their military experience. I think that's a very good idea as we try to encourage vets to get into this sector. What are some of the other areas, perhaps, beyond that we might be able to make a difference that would involve and encourage more veterans to be involved?
Sir, I think if you look at the educational system itself, if you look at the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and the uses of those funds and identify specifically that veterans entering into an energy type of a curriculum would be allowed to use those funds, whether it's at a curriculum-based program or a continuing education program, that the funds would still be available, that would make a huge difference. And it's money that's already set aside through the Department of Labor to fund this training. So it's just tweaking the way we use the funds that are already available. Other things, the GI Bill. The GI Bill doesn't currently allow the use of funds from the GI Bill for continuing education type courses. They have to be degree granting types of courses. So our GI Bill is actually forcing people to go to college for a degree that they don't necessarily want, just to attain the job skills to get into the workforce. And then, of course, with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the waiver that you discussed for the CDL, that waiver is only good for 12 months. If I drove a truck for 10 years in the military, it's very doubtful in the 12 months that I'm going to forget how to drive that truck. Yeah. Yet my skills have to be qualified very quickly, or I lose the opportunity to attain that CDL. So I think expanding the opportunity to get the CDL not only to different populations in the military. I was supply chain. My job is not truck driver, but I assure you most of my guys had CDL type licenses to operate equipment because it was required to move things around in theater. So,
thank you. Ms. Menard, congratulations on what you've done, and your daughter's waking up now. What are some of the greatest challenges that you see to try and increase women in the workforce in this field? You as one that has gone from a really large company to what you're doing now, what are some of the things that we can do to encourage more women to participate?
So really the number one answer is visibility. I'm often struck by the lack of knowledge around what opportunities exist, what skills are required. So the joke is everyone thinks I'm an engineer. I'm actually educated as a journalist by background. So I tell people I'm a people engineer. And I make it my business, to learn, to show, curiosity, to ask questions. It wasn't until I went to an offshore rig, lived in a man camp, literally, and had been to petrochemical facilities and sites all over the world, I truly had an appreciation for what it takes out of a very complicated value chain to get energy to life. E&Y did a study not too long ago that looked at perceptions, positive perceptions of industries as a whole. And it's probably no surprise to anyone in this room that the tech industry is seen as the most popular place, for anyone to work. But at the end of the day, energy drives those things. And I just think that when we talk to young people, when we talk to just, the population at large does not understand what it takes to get energy to the doorstep. And the more technology we use, the more we expect, the more things we do, people need to really understand that. So I think visibility of the opportunities and really driving people to understand that this is a great place to work and it's a meaningful place to work.
Thank you. I know my time has expired. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Rush. And I want to stress how important this hearing is, and I'm pleased we're able to continue. Well, starting really and continuing the committee's efforts to expand training and promote diversity. I know we've done this on a bipartisan basis always, and he's always been out front on it. But let me start with Ms. Parmigiori. In your testimony, you discussed the need to focus on clean energy jobs, and I thought it was interesting when you mentioned that consumer preference is driving companies like yours to make cleaner energy choices, and as a result of those trends, the vast majority of job growth in the energy sector currently comes from clean energy jobs. So just a few questions. Where are you currently seeing the largest share of job growth at your company? How is that focused on newer and expanding technologies such as renewable energy or grid modernization, for example?
Thank you, sir. We have clean energy, distributed energy coming onto our systems across all of our 6 utilities, and that requires us to rethink how we're designing the system. The system has to be much more dynamic. It has to be much more automated as we think about having variable resources on the system that are not always there, and so you have to adjust the grid to take them when they're there and adjust when they're not. And so to answer your question, we're looking for we always have job growth in the skilled craft areas, and skilled craft to understand analog as well as digital technologies is going to be important in the future. Data scientists is a huge area for us. We now have sensors all over the grid that tell us what's going on in a way that we didn't before. We have to be able to take that information in and do something with it in a very short order. And so data scientists who can help us crunch that data are very important, and there's a shortage of data scientists in the United States. We need power systems engineers who also understand information technology. Those are some of the big areas from the utility side of the business that we are in need of as we bring on these new types of resources onto the system.
And I assume that you'll tell me that those are the areas where we should focus the training, correct, in those areas you just mentioned?
For our business as the utility, but you have a tremendous number of companies out there who are in the business, in the solar business, in the storage business, in energy efficiency. My company, through our multiple utilities, spends $600 million a year on energy efficiency programs that help customers reduce their bill and control their energy usage. They're hugely important. We don't do that work ourselves. We hire other companies who bring in those workers. So there's a whole universe of connected companies that will need workers who can do the installation of solar, energy efficiency work in homes and that sort of work.
Now, is that a different challenge to build the workforce for offshore wind or the more efficiency, the efficiency jobs that you're talking about as opposed to, more established technologies like coal or natural gas? Does that involve a different challenge?
Well, I think because they're new, we've got a pretty good, track record in the industry of producing the kinds of skill sets that serve the grid that we have and the kinds of resources that we have, nuclear, coal, gas. These new resources, they're new, so you just need to develop that pipeline. I would say that's the only difference. I don't think the skill sets are particularly unique, but we haven't had that pipeline in the past.
But is it important for us to, because my time's running out, is it important for us to focus in building a workforce on those newer industries, renewables, efficiency, as opposed to emphasizing, the legacy sectors at this point in order to be successful and create a workforce?
Well, I think you need both. I think there's momentum in the legacy sectors. You've got that sort of foundation. I think the new sectors, require some momentum, a push behind them, and that would be the difference.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. McMorris Rogers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Appreciate the witnesses and hearing each of your perspectives, especially on the importance of green energy and the infrastructure and the workforce necessary to meet our nation's energy needs. I'm a proud supporter of a wide variety of clean energy initiatives, including hydropower, which plays a dominant role in my district in Eastern Washington, as well as all across the country. And clean, renewable, reliable hydropower, I believe, needs to remain part of the solution as we have these discussions moving forward. It also is very important in many of the rural communities that I represent. I also appreciated hearing your thoughts on how we improve diversity in the energy sector. And I wanted to ask a question of Ms. Meinert. Really applaud your leadership at Pink Petro. It was great to hear of your work and really focusing on addressing the lack of diversity within the energy companies. Appreciate you working also on an all-of-the-above energy approach. So I know that we would like to have, we're not going to hear from DOE today, and I think that we should have included them. I'm hopeful that my colleagues across the aisle will open up this process as we consider this legislation to be more inclusive of women in energy. As a woman that works every day to make her mark in a traditionally male-dominated field, I believe it is crucial to support those who serve as role models and encourage young women in this country to strive for jobs that are typically found in the male-dominated fields. So to Ms. Meinert, as a woman with a background in oil and gas, how do you recommend? I know you've spoken some to that, but I just would like to give you some more time, any specific recommendations on how we open up traditionally male-dominated fields to women, and especially those in the rural areas. What kind of approach do you believe is most valuable in targeting women and other minorities who are underrepresented in the energy sector?
Thank you so much for the question. I believe engagement is key. Having face-to-face conversations. A number of years ago when I worked for Shell, we did a 50-city tour, and we had conversations with Americans. We had conversations with people to try to understand their perceptions. I think the way to reach people, too, is through social media. We live in a world where information is ongoing. Information is more readily available today than it has been of the past. And so I think that it's key that we use digital to reach folks, but also have real honest conversations about these opportunities and make those opportunities available and visible to those communities.
You spoke about the importance of role models and mentors and the work that you're doing there. I have 2 young daughters. They're 8 and 5. And part of what I have learned is the importance of reaching our girls younger and introducing them to what's available much younger. I really applaud your work to create this Lean In Energy Mentorship Program, which is really trying to reach women and partner them with the mentors. I would like to just hear you talk a little bit more about how you've gone about recruiting both the mentors and the mentees. How do you go about identifying individuals to serve as mentors and those that wish to be mentees?
So thank you for the question. When I launched Pink Petro, what we found was that women wanted access to mentors and mentees, and I decided that because I am a for-profit company, that mentoring was not something that I was going to, commercially monetize, and so we sought to develop a nonprofit organization that all companies could participate in funding. And what we did was we flew to Silicon Valley. I met with a number of technology companies. And through my own experience with Pink Petro, what we learned was that technology can connect. So we've been able to use social media to get the word out. What we've found, interestingly enough, is we have 10% of our community are male mentees. So it's kind of interesting when you use technology to harness the power of diversity, bringing people together, accessibility. It's pretty powerful outcome to be able to bring folks together. So we just launched the platform a few months back, and we're in our first round right now, and I look forward to giving you more results as we progress.
That's great. Great to hear. I first of all appreciate that my parents always encouraged me that I could be anything that I wanted to be. But I'm also grateful for the male mentors in my life and believe that we need both. And we need those role models and those that dedicate to that next generation. So thank you all very much.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Doyle for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Upton for calling the hearing today. Boy, I tell you, workforce development in Pittsburgh, we have 9,000 jobs open that aren't being filled because we don't have people with the skill sets that are needed to fill those jobs. And I can't tell you how frustrating that is when we see this disconnect between what, the jobs that are out there and the skill sets people need, and we're not making those marriages. I had convened a group of 30 CEOs in my city, and I asked them what kept them awake at night, taxes, government regulation. It was none of those things. It was one CEO pointed at another and said, I'm afraid he's going to steal my employees. That's how desperate the situation gets. But we also realize, we have universities like Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh that have these great programs in technology, but you got to get to these kids in grade school. That's what I think, especially in the underrepresented communities. Young people don't understand what a career in STEM looks like because maybe nobody in their neighborhood or in their house is in that field. So how do we expose young people, especially in underrepresented communities, to STEM, and what can we be doing? And maybe I'll start with you, Ms. Parmigiori. What can businesses like yours do to partner with early education centers to start to introduce these kinds of programs at the grade school level so that as children go through the process, because a lot of STEM, starts with very simple things at an early age, but it keeps building upon it, and it puts more people into that track where they can be trainable. So what can business? Because that's what I said to the CEOs. I said, this is the problem. What are you doing about it? How are you reaching out into these communities and getting them? So I'm just curious. You've got a very progressive company that's done a lot of these things, and I'm curious to hear what business can do to expand those kind of programs.
Yeah, I think we absolutely have a responsibility here. We've done a lot of research on why women and people of color aren't in the STEM fields. I call it the 3 A's: awareness, access to educational opportunities, and what I call attitude, which is really about do I see myself in that industry? Do I feel like I have the confidence to make a step into that kind of an industry? And those are the three things that tend to develop that we see that you have to, you have to cut through. And I absolutely agree. It starts very young. One of the things that we've studied is the fact that summertime is so critical for young people, that kids who get experiential learning and opportunities and spend their summers being stimulated do so much better than kids who don't have those opportunities. One of the reasons why we started some of the summer programs that I referred to, the Icebox Derby, it's for girls a little bit older. We start in middle school into high school, but to bring these kids in the summer and give them an experiential learning, that access to experiential learning, awareness that there's these jobs out there, and then finally the confidence they meet with other professionals who they can relate to and work with them. So we're doing that at the high school level, middle school level. We have educational programs that get out into the elementary schools. We work to help develop curriculum that we then train teachers and provide to elementary and middle schools. So we are looking to to encourage, raise awareness, provide educational opportunities for younger and younger people. And I completely agree. You've got to get to them early, and the summertime becomes critically important. So we do, we work on programs that keep these kids engaged over the summer.
Yeah, and I think they need to see what a career in these fields look like. I remember the first time I went into Google in Pittsburgh, and they have a large presence in our city. And the first thing I noticed when I walked in there, they had a pool table and a pinball machine, and they ate for free. And I was thinking, this is a cool place to work. And so what do you have to know to work at a place like this? I'll tell you, if grade schools were taking kids through companies like that, a lot of kids would be saying, what do I got to do to work at a company like this? And I do. I think that's so important that we start to reach down at the lower grade levels and make these matches. And it also seems to me that community colleges and other institutions in the area, I think, need to do a better job talking to employers and saying, what are you looking for? A lot of these jobs don't require a graduate degree at Carnegie Mellon. But they do require some specialized training that some people can get in a 2-year program and then go outside and actually get a job that pays a family-sustaining wage. I see a lot of kids going to college with bachelor's degrees in journalism. I'm just kidding you. And $30,000 or $40,000 of student loan debt on them, and they can't get a job that pays any money. It's
if
a
I
problem.
could respond, I think businesses are becoming more and more aware of community college opportunities to have those, more truncated degrees, but that actually end up with some sort of certificate that allows somebody to go out and get a good paying job. I think we're getting better at that. I think we've got a ways to go.
I thank the chair. To start out the first subcommittee hearing in a very bipartisan manner, I want to thank Mr. Doyle. He is a proud co-sponsor with myself of a bill that we drop tomorrow that's designed to help FERC fill some very needed open positions for pipeline safety. We're doing this by giving them a chance to charge market salaries, give market salaries to FERC employees so they don't lose them to the private sector. This will be dropped tomorrow, so thank you, Mr. Doyle. Also, congratulations, Chairman, on your ascension to the chairmanship of this committee. Welcome all the witnesses. A special welcome for Mrs. Maynard. You and I have the same bond, Rice University. I know you're here in some tough times. November, LSU, 72 Bill Flores' A&M, 74 and 7 overtimes. January, uncalled mugging that cost the Saints a chance to play the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And now you're here in the prime time for crawfish boils back home. So thank you very much, and thank you, Allie, for joining your mom this morning. She dropped off one more time. This bill is important for me because I represent the most diverse district in America, Texas 22. The census that'll come out in 2022 after the census is taken in 2020, we expect my home county of Fort Bend to be 25, 25, 25, 25% divided equally between Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, and Caucasians. And that's why I want everybody, regardless of creed or religion or race, to have a good, high-paying job in the energy sector. And I'm proud to have local partner schools like Wharton County Junior College, Alvin Community College, and San Jacinto College involved in this endeavor to open those jobs up to all comers. These schools are running 2-year programs that give all Texans a chance to learn key skills and get work without going to a 4-year university. For example, for this upcoming fall 2019 enrollment, about 58% of STEM majors at Alvin Community College are minorities. Minorities, 58%. At San Jacinto College this past fall, that was almost 80%. That's incredible. That's Texas 22. But of course, Mr. Chairman, we have some work to do here in D.C. I'm still reviewing your new bill. There were big changes from the last Congress, but I hope we can come together and get something done on this important issue. I want to ask you all, start out with you, Mrs. Maynard. One theme here is over and over, to get kids into STEM, we have 2 challenges. First of all, they don't think it's cool. It's cool to go to Wall Street. It's cool to go to Silicon Valley. It's not cool to go into energy. It's low tech. It's not low tech. We all know that. Also, as was mentioned, we try to capture them at the college level. That's way, way, way too late. So my question is, have y'all talked to local school districts, get them engaged, try to catch them maybe middle school, maybe elementary school? Ms. May, you're open first, and just go around the table there.
Right. So I absolutely agree we need to reach sooner. My daughter's 8. I talk about energy all the time. I think the 2 DOEs, the Department of Education and the Department of Energy, need to talk together about elementary level education, right? We need to look at what we're teaching, how we're exposing kids. We have great schools in Texas, the Energy High School. We have a number of ISDs that have STEM-focused educations. It's too late, though. It's way too late to reach kids in high school. We have got to get to kids much earlier and if we think that we're going to be successful at getting them in energy.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, I was just going to add, kids love technology. And once I think the biggest thing is access. And we work with a lot of schools. I do a lot of mentoring with elementary school, middle school students. And once you can do the tie-in to say, this is how your iPad is powered, this is how your PlayStation is powered, they get it. I think the biggest thing is showing up. And to your second part, we have to make it cool. And one of the things, we work very closely with the Dream Corps, and they've done an excellent job of doing unique events where they'll bring in diverse artists to reach a younger population. And there's emerging things like the Broccoli City Festival in D.C., which brings over 100,000 people yearly to talk about sustainability and energy. So I just think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, but we have to show up, and kids need to see role models and really break it down to them. And once they get that, they're very engaged.
And one form, too, back home around time is robotics competitions. Kids do these amazing things with robots. They get involved in science, technology. I played a banana peel piano. Banana peels, dried banana peels wired up with wires. I played chopsticks at a local elementary school. So thank you for your time. I'm out. I yield back.
Kelly is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman. It's always tough to follow the gentleman from Texas, but I'll give my best out of there, Pete. I thank the witnesses this morning. Ms. Pramagori, given the lack of new nuclear construction, can we ensure that there is a trained workforce for advanced nuclear, such as small modular reactors?
So we are obviously quite interested in that as a business, our nuclear skill sets, and we do fund nuclear scholarships for engineers to ensure that we've got a strong pipeline. But it is something that concerns us. It concerns us as the nuclear power industry wanes. I don't think that that is a skill set that we want to concede to the rest of the world.
Right.
I think that we want to maintain our dominance, our leadership in nuclear skill sets, and I think it's a very important area. As I said, we devote a significant amount of dollars to scholarships to bring people through nuclear programs and the nuclear engineering programs, but I think it's something that we should pay attention to.
Thank you. Well, in California, the wildfires are an increasing threat, and I'd like to expand the definition of workers in the energy to include jobs that make sure our system's resilient, such as clearing out underbrush around our transmission lines. Can you speak about the diversity in that sort of job?
Vegetation management is what we would call that, and it's very important to manage the vegetation around our lines and our systems. Obviously, California has felt that quite acutely, but we see that across the United States. There's a fair amount of diversity in those ranks, but I do think there's opportunity there as well, and I think that we'll see those businesses grow also. One of the things we have looked for in the vegetation management ranks is to find there are some companies that are quite strong and quite large that do this, and we'd like to see, we like to help companies grow, so the opportunity to grow small businesses, diverse businesses, I think that's an area of tremendous opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Trung, do you have any data on the number of jobs per unit of energy produced in the renewable or clean energy fields versus the fossil fuels?
That's a level of metric I don't have access to, but I will say to your question around how do we actually begin to address the opportunities that we are seeing in California, where we actually literally saw paradise burning, and the opportunities for us to diversify the workforce for a state as diverse as California. I think what we need to begin thinking about is really how do we create the supply and demand that we need in order for this to happen. In the policy realm, we really need to think about diversifying our supply from grade school on to on-the-job experience with employers to others. We can create a demand for diverse workforce by having policies that actually incentivize that at the school level with on-the-job employment, with on-the-job internship and opportunities, to making sure that we're really demanding that through policies, having a demand for renewable energy, having a demand for clearing the underbrushes around the grids, having a demand for those actually creates the opportunities for the people who actually get trained to get jobs that are going to be created by these employers.
Well, thank you. Ms. Colon de Mias, what does certification in energy efficiency look like? Is that a sort of a degree, or what is it? What do you mean when you say certification?
So there are multiple careers in energy efficiency. HVAC is a career, an insulator is a career, and energy assessment is a career. And each of those has their own set of certifications. So for example, there's a Building Performance Institute that certifies building scientists as analysts or envelope specialists. That ensures that when you're running a building that you take into account all of the factors that it requires. Energy is something that, like air, we don't really think about, but we're using it from the moment that we're waking and even while we're sleeping, right? It's a huge demand as every part of our daily life. And so what my industry does is look at the way that those things work together and ensure safety and high performance. So there are all kinds of certifications you could get in my industry.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, what's the matchup of employment opportunities in the energy field versus the geographic available of potential employees? Yeah, sir, what's the matchup between job opportunities in the energy field and the geographic availability of workers to take those jobs?
Yeah, very good question. So, I mean, there's parts of the country that when you look at renewables that you see more, for example, in solar, and that's more driven by state policy, renewable portfolio standards. In California, for example, you have a very aggressive renewable portfolio standard, but then there's parts of the country in the South, like North Carolina, South Carolina, where they've passed better renewable portfolio standards that you're seeing solar there as well, too. But if you just take a step back and look at energy jobs in general, you've got generation, which is all across the country, whether it's natural gas, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass. We have resources all throughout the country. The delivery, as far as getting that energy to consumers and businesses, that workforce is all throughout the country. And then when we talk about storage, and microgrid. And one of the things that we haven't talked about is electrifying our transportation sector. And that's one of the biggest sources, if not the biggest sources, of carbon pollution. And most utilities across the country are now looking at how to electrify the transportation sector. So I think all these opportunities aren't geographically constrained. I think the opportunities are across the board.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you, gentlemen. And now we'll recognize Mr. McKinley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is something you've been interested in, I know, for years, and I really welcome having this discussion. If no other reason, it helps to underscore the diversity or the differences we have between urban and rural settings, because this panel primarily is all from urban centers. I see them from District of Columbia, from Connecticut, California, but I'm not seeing it from the coal fields. And so my concern here is when I think about in the coal areas of in West Virginia, in Kentucky, we got Harlan, Kentucky. We got in West Virginia, we have Gary, West Virginia. Welch, we could go on. We could say War, Big Chimney, Thurman. All these little communities. All of you have ignored this transition. All of you. Where are we going to put? Where are we going to train these people for? It may be indeed a movement into the renewable energy field, but what are we going to do for those communities? The companies for years have ignored them. They're not investing in Thurman or Welch or other, all across, not just West Virginia, but Kentucky and Wyoming and elsewhere. There's a reason that the companies haven't located there, despite the incentives that might be out there as promulgated or put forth in this legislation. So I was hoping that we would hear how we help those communities, because I know the chairman and I have talked about that. How do we reach out to those people to help them make this transition? And that transition may be, as it was in the 50s after the war, they left and they went someplace else. That may be the solution. They have to abandon War and Thurman and Big Chimney and Harlan. I want to know who's going to buy their homes. I want to understand what we're doing with this, because for the coal miners and the related industries, their biggest asset is their real estate. And so when we tell them, you can get a job in creating solar panels, but it's just not going to be in Thurman. So you'll have to locate someplace else. What happens to the community? What happens to the school system, the churches, the fire departments, anything else that occurs with them when we abandon those communities to do our retraining for someplace else? And you know, we can, I know it's a noble idea to talk about the transitioning over to the renewables and the possibilities with that, but I'm enormously frustrated with that. I don't understand why we're not helping the transition using the resources and assets that we have to be able to make a better transition from fossil fuels to that later on by doing innovation. Finding out how we use what we have cleaner and more efficiently. But that's not the program. That's not what I'm hearing coming up in this discussion. All of it seems to be, I know you're chomping at the bit, and maybe I could stop. I'm just looking at little county, Pleasants County, West Virginia, that because of rules and regulations that have been promulgated here, they're going to lose a power plant there that represents 30% of all the revenue generated for that county. 30%. What are they going to do for their education system? It's just going to collapse. Or you can go out to Arizona to the Navajo and the Hopi tribe, where they have a generating plant out there that's being threatened, and we're saying they can be trained. That's fine, but if what they're doing right now is 30% for the Navajo tribe comes from that power plant. 85% for the operation of the Hopi tribe. Folks, let's be realistic about it. These people like being in their communities. They like being there. That's why they're there. What are we doing to train them there? What jobs are going to go there for them? Or are we making it, by this legislation, are we saying you have to leave your town? I've run out of time on a thing, but Ms. Maynard, you have some thoughts?
I have a thought, and I think the thought is, this is the group that needs to think about that. Because we all come from a different place. We all come from different parts of the sector. The oil and gas industry is a boom bust, okay? I see this all the time. We rush into an area, right, and when prices collapse, we leave. And so I think it's something we need to think about, working together, because over time, we're gonna have these challenges of displaced workers, and we need a way to solve that problem. But I think this is a group to ask of, thinking about what that might look like.
You see, how do we train them so that they can work in Thurman or War or Big Chimney, not abandon their towns to go someplace else? That's what I've not heard, and I hope somehow as this legislation matures over the next year or so, that we'll have more of an opportunity to talk about how we take care of the folks that are living in those towns, not about the future.
I would like the opportunity.
You want to answer?
Yeah, I would love the opportunity to respond. I haven't had much opportunity to say anything, and I am a minority, and I am a female, and I'm a business owner, and I train people in workforce is what I do. And the intention of this bill, to my understanding, having read it and the summary, is that we would be looking to train people in their communities. So Connecticut actually isn't an urban center. It's quite suburban. And we do serve the entire state of Connecticut. But I'm not the only state that does that. These jobs that we're talking about, creating training for, they exist already. And those people who work in Pennsylvania or West Virginia absolutely could participate in working in this industry and make really good earning wages. And so the intention of this would be to engage people, one, at a younger age in the public school system and introduce them to science-based concepts to prepare them for the jobs. And two, the people who are displaced workers, it's to train them to take the positions that are available right now today, to be part of that community and work and engage in active.
Ms. Collins, I'm sorry, I've run out of time on a thing. They're already making good wage. They're making $80,000 a year, but because of the regulations and things we're imposing on them in Washington, they're losing their jobs. That's why the decline in the fossil fuel industry across this country. We're taking those wages away, and we're going to replace them with something that is a hope that something will happen for them. So I yield back.
Mack is recognized for 5 minutes. Lois Mack, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have to look around my colleague, Ms. Berrigan, here, because I want to direct my first question, at least to Mr. Simpson, but thank you, Nanette. But before I get to that, I like to brag about Iowa and how well we're doing when it comes to wind energy. We're at almost 40% of our electricity generated by wind. We've got 66 or so solar companies, over 800 jobs. We're doing a pretty darn good job in the state of Iowa when it comes to renewable energy, and we do take an all-of-the-above approach too. We have a nuclear plant, coal-fired plants, a new hydroelectric plant is going into my district as we speak too. But these are great jobs that get created by all these different approaches, to our energy portfolio. But especially in that renewable field, we're very proud of the thousands of jobs in wind energy and solar and what have you, as I mentioned. Workforce development is a big issue. We started up in northwest Iowa in 2004 at Iowa Lakes Community College. They have a wind energy program up there, and other community colleges throughout the state have adopted that program as well. Kirkwood and Cedar Rapids has a big wind turbine on its campus, and so they do train folks there. But I want to go to Mr. Simpson to begin with. Thank you for your service, first of all, in the Marine Corps. I did not have the honor and privilege to serve in the military myself, but I have a stepson and his wife who are both active duty Marines still out at Camp Pendleton, so I want to thank you very much for that service. And your focus on veterans, you brought up a couple of things in your testimony today. You mentioned a veterans apprenticeship program. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, what that is exactly?
Yes, sir. So there are a couple. So the military has several occupations that are recognized already by the Department of Labor through the U.S. Military Apprenticeship Program, where your job you do in the military gains credited hours toward an apprenticeship.
As should be the case.
So that is one of the things that already exists. And as industries, we have the ability to implement VA and Department of Labor approved apprenticeship programs to train our new workforce as they come on board.
Right.
So that's what Pike has done, is established a training program approved through Department of Labor and the Veterans Administration.
And you mentioned one of the roadblocks that you face is that when you go to these different bases, each one has sort of its own rules and regulations as to how you can gain access. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. As I mentioned in my testimony, as simple as North Carolina, Fort Bragg has one set of rules. Seymour Johnson Air Force Base has another.
Right.
Camp Lejeune Marine Corps Base has a different set of rules. And then Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, 50 miles down the road, that falls under the same command, has different rules.
Yeah, I was on Armed Services for 8 years. I understand your concern about the different rules. And I don't want to put you in the hot seat too much here. It's not really your job to figure out how the DOD should deal with this. But do you have any thoughts about how we can standardize access across bases? Any thoughts at all on that?
I do, sir. I think when you look at the transition program as a whole, the transition program was developed in these halls.
Right.
You all approved legislation that created a transition program to ensure that veterans had the appropriate skills entering the workforce to be able to attain a job or go to college, whichever they chose to do. So those things were created here. I think that establishing a set of core foundational rules that allows contact between employers, the commercial sector, and the DOD sector is the key.
Right.
The opportunity to go in and present my business to those service members as they transition, so that they understand that you don't necessarily have to work in a bucket truck out in the weather and all the elements that we work in, that you can also be an engineer. Mm-hmm. That you can be a work management technician going into our customers' database, pulling jobs out, right, and then sending those jobs to our crews that are in the field. There's so many other opportunities than just line work.
And we politicians are really good at on a bipartisan basis at expressing our concerns for veterans and our support for veterans, but we've got to find better ways so that folks like you can interface with them and get to them and have that access to them. I'm a strong supporter of community colleges. I already mentioned some of the colleges in Iowa. I have my own saying that community colleges are the principal intersection between workforce development and education. Any thoughts on that? I hate to just focus on Mr. Simpson here, but I have limited time.
Absolutely. I worked in workforce development with the state of North Carolina for 2 years running a veterans program, and in that process interacted a lot with the community colleges, with their folks that go out and integrate with business to identify training areas that are needed and develop a new workforce. I believe the community college is a great place to attain the education. I think, again, the funding issue is the problem, making the funding available so that continuing education is acceptable, right, as well as curriculum education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to abuse my time. I yield back. Thanks to all the participants here, too.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Griffith is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. This is an interesting and valuable topic, and I hope that we have the opportunity to work through regular order to learn about this bill and other workforce development programs that already exist at DOE and other agencies. I will have some questions for DOE when the time is right, and hopefully they'll be at another hearing and I can ask them at that time. I also would note that if we're going to look at workforce development in a holistic way, we should look at populations that have seen a decline in industry jobs, such as many localities in my district. And we need to make sure that economic development is a part of this as well, so that we can train folks for local jobs. You may be hearing, Mr. McKinley and I come from states where coal has been king, or for areas where coal has been king, so you're hearing a similar vent. I do appreciate, Mr. Chairman, that you did include so many areas in your development skills section of the bill, including energy efficiency. We actually have a group out of Christiansburg, Virginia, that I represent, Community Housing Partners, that I toured recently, where they're going into homes and helping the people who are doing the HVAC systems and doing the energy efficiency at the homes actually understand, getting the certifications that you mentioned earlier. Ms. Colon and Mejias, thank you. They're doing that there. Chemical manufacturing is listed in the bill, and I appreciate that because just outside of my district in Kingsport, Tennessee, we have Eastman, also in Martinsville, but they do, in Eastman, they do chemical manufacturing using coal and natural gas as their feedstocks to make all kinds of different plastics that we use every day. Likewise, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention oil and natural gas. And of course, the bill does include coal and training folks for coal jobs. Mr. Olson said we got to convince folks that it's cool to get into energy. Folks in my district, because of the money,
if you can find a job, and they're better today than they were a couple of years ago, but they're paying anywhere from 75 to 90. If you get overtime and you work overtime, you can make $120,000 a year. Wind and solar is great, but we have to recall that wind and solar are paying roughly 40 to 60 if you're not one of the top folks in the industry. So it's important to remember that. But still, even at that amount of money, the folks want to stay in their communities. They love the mountains. They don't want to leave, and they'll be looking for jobs. So I'm going to ask you all how you feel this bill in particular can help, because we have some opportunities at surface mines for wind and solar, depending on the wind. Every mountain's different, so you can't say you do it on every mountain. But wind and solar. And then we got some bills passed last year, and I think most people are supportive in a bipartisan fashion for doing closed-loop pump storage inside abandoned mines. They already have the electricity. They already have the vertical built into a lot of the mines, and you could use the mines to use water that's already, you don't have to look for critters. It's already water that you're bringing in from the outside. And so that's an opportunity. But how do you think this bill might help that? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to answer. Mr. Campbell, you seem rather interested, but I may have gone off topic for you.
I'm happy to start. I agree with both you and Congressman McKinley that rural areas have been overlooked, but I think we also have to have better public-private partnerships, and that also includes stronger policy. Some of the reasons in places and states that you don't see as much solar and wind is at the state level not being
What in this bill do you think would help my region get some of those things?
Sure. One of the things I think directly is not just segmenting to solar or wind or picking winners in technology, training people to understand energy. What's an energy job? When you look at utility companies, they have an aging workforce.
They understand energy because we have natural gas, coal bed methane, and we have coal. They understand energy, and they understand energy jobs pay good. What we got to do is find them a job.
So I think we have to work together. I think we need better policy, but on the other hand, with the training component, you also have to take a long-term view. So as I talked about, like the transportation sector is coming around the corner. So there's real-time changes that we have to prepare the workforce of the future. Some of those jobs might not be there now, but I think it'd be short-sighted not to train people for the jobs that are going to be there 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So,
and I appreciate it. Can anybody else tell me how this bill in particular might help my region on the areas that I touched on?
I would absolutely love to help you because efficiency is applicable to absolutely any type of energy
Everywhere.
use,
Absolutely.
not just buildings, not just cars, our lights, every single thing, our heating, our cooling, our cooking, our refrigeration. Efficiency is something that draws down demand. It is literally the concept of using less to do more, right? So it applies to everything, and anyone can be trained in my industry. And so there are entry-level jobs, and there are high-level jobs. There are jobs at the public utilities and demand reduction in energy efficiency, and those people can make up to $250,000 a year. Many people don't know the industry exists and don't understand energy. It's great that people in your community do understand energy, but there are so many people that have no idea where electricity comes from. They don't understand their heating and cooling systems, and so there are real opportunities for people who are needing jobs to find entry-level jobs and high-level jobs.
And I will agree that energy efficiency is a conservative idea because we're conserving the energy. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank the gentleman. Now we'll recognize Mr. Beasley for 5 minutes, and let me take a moment to welcome you as a new member of this subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the welcome. And just want to, again, thank the chairman, the committee, and the witnesses today, and really glad that we're here discussing this bill today. I think it's very timely. Last Congress, myself and Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, we founded the Blue Collar Caucus, and there are several members of ENC that are members of the Blue Collar Caucus. And one of the goals that we have is to bring attention and solutions to the dwindling career opportunities that we see in some spheres of manufacturing and the building trades, and see how we can increase those. And I clearly think that there's an opportunity to leverage our need to transition to a more sustainable energy mix and to rethinking what a blue-collar job is. We know that a green-collar economy is here in many aspects today, and that's going to continue to grow. And we've heard from witnesses today that it's not the lack of jobs, that there are already green-collar jobs here. We see some of those in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One of those companies, Encore, is one of our electric utilities in Dallas-Fort Worth, and the largest utility in Texas. And right now they're preparing for the challenge of forming a new electric fleet of vehicles. These are large EVs, Class 6 or 8 trucks that are going to be used for delivery that would operate during the day and return to a central depot to charge at night. This overnight time capitalizes on the cheap and clean wind energy that we have in Texas. A lot of people think of Texas as a oil and gas state, and indeed we are, particularly in the Permian Basin, but we are also one of the leaders on wind. Our wind story in Texas is absolutely and unbelievably incredible. And we have the space, obviously, to be able to achieve a lot of that. But a lot of these vehicles are going to be charged at night, which is when the wind is more likely to be utilized into the grid. The challenge, which is really the opportunity of our time, is ensuring that we have a diverse and trained workforce that's ready to work in these jobs. Again, I'm going to remind everybody that a lot of these jobs are already on the horizon. And my question to the panel is that you've all been at the forefront of efforts to reduce the gap in training and representation of minority groups in the clean energy workforce. I want to know what kind of impact could funding and programs in a bill like Representative Rush make in ensuring a diverse workforce in our growing green economy? Anybody that wants to jump in and answer could.
Investing in education for underrepresented populations or all people of America opens the doors to opportunity for employment. You know, it's very hard to get a job if you don't have the right skill set. And there are many areas of America that currently don't offer strong STEM courses in public schools. And there are areas in the community colleges where there are not programs for green jobs. And I do agree that, you know, earlier Mr. Simpson and also Mr. Campbell mentioned that, you know, energy, basic skills and STEM skills are applicable to any job, right? So by investing the money on the front end, we're allowing the opportunity for people who are not able to find employment to have access to those jobs. And I think that is what the key part of this bill is opening those doors for opportunities through education and training.
Yeah. And I want to also remind everybody as well, and something that I don't know, I have to leave momentarily, and it may have been touched on, but we were in Seattle, several members of the Congressional Black Caucus were in Seattle a couple of years ago, and because of the evolution in technology that's going on right now, not only are we talking about many of these blue-collar jobs transitioning to more green-collar type jobs, but they're going to be white-collar positions because of technology where people are going to see those jobs move to blue-collar, green-collar, gray-collar type status because of the technology. And that's something that we also need to be focused on as we talk about the various challenges and bringing more of this technology onto the grid. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank the gentleman for yielding back. Now the chair recognizes Mr. Bouchon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. It's been interesting. A couple things quickly, Mr. Simpson, on the CDL driver's license for veterans. You probably don't know, but I had a bill many years ago that actually put the current situation into law to streamline the process for CDLs for veterans. And so I'd be interested in the pitfalls of what we have in place and how we can improve it. I mean, just briefly, because I have a number of questions. I mean, we can revise what we did years ago to improve it.
Thank you for the question. I think that really, if we look at it, it's the timeline that's been established, the 12 months in order to get certified. If you miss that 12-month window, then your license, basically you start over from scratch as if you've never driven a truck before.
So that's the biggest.
That's huge.
The biggest deal.
And then the MOSs, having specific MOSs associated. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration form doesn't indicate MOSs, but when you get to the state level, in a lot of states, they've indicated specific MOSs. So in the Marine Corps, I've got one truck driver MOS.
Yeah,
but I've got many more people that drive trucks than just that MOS.
So we'll need to, please contact my office if you would at some point.
Yes, sir.
And give us that, send out that information to us because we can hopefully expand that. So thank you. Mr. Campbell, you were talking about solar, somewhat about solar. Many of the panelists have, but what are we doing in trying to advance recycling of solar panels that are at the end of life, because Europeans, for example, have that in their process, through the manufacturing of the panels, a plan for end of life. Because if you look at where we are now, and we're going to continue to expand solar, and I'm an all the above energy supporter, even though I'm in coal country. Is there anything anybody on the panel knows about what we're doing for 20 to 30 years from now? Because with all these solar panels, as they end their life, because right now in the U.S. We put them in landfills. Anybody have any? Start with you. Do you have any idea about what we're looking at there?
I'm not as well versed on the recycling, but I can definitely circle back and find out.
Does anybody in the panel have any input on that at all? I think that kind of proves my point, because I've been looking at this. I've been starting to look at this, and I think if we look at the environmental impact of any industry, right, we need to look at the industry in total, and that includes the production of panels and the end of life, what we do with panels. That's true with electric cars too, with the batteries and all that. And I think that's important. I support those industries, but we just need to recognize that we're going to landfill hundreds of millions of tons of solar panels probably 25 or 30 years from now. So I support an all above energy. In fact, Indiana is a big manufacturing state per capita, and I was a little bit disappointed to see the new bill has introduced did not include some of the bipartisan language we worked on regarding the fossil fuel industry, nuclear energy, and some manufacturing. Ms. Maynard, who are we potentially leaving out with this limited focus on the green collar jobs? In this bill, are we leaving out anyone? I think in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I believe we need to look at oil and gas, and I also believe when I went to research this, I actually went to this committee's website page, and I didn't see the words oil and gas even listed on the front page.
I think that kind of answers.
No, and I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, the words oil and the words gas and the words climate, there are all these terms that in our language, right, they create visceral responses when I look back and say to myself, we're here because of those things. And I think everyone in this room recognizes that we're in an energy transition, and it's a great economic opportunity, but we absolutely have to make sure that we're inclusive, particularly when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, of folks. We got to have folks and forums.
Understood. Ms. Colon de Mejas, is that right?
That's perfect.
Yeah, I really, the energy efficiency thing is really important. And why can't we convince some of our citizens to look at their house and do things that improve our energy efficiency? Because that's a struggle, right? People just, they just won't do it.
So,
is it money or what is it? Knowledge? What is it?
I would love to answer you, and I have no seconds left, but I'll answer you anyway.
With some discretion from the chairman, I think. Go ahead.
Is that okay? So it's a great question. Energy efficiency is something that is not talked about, right? It's not sexy like wind or solar. It's not as cool as an EV car. It just gets the job done. I call it the unsung workhorse of America. Just in my state alone, energy efficiency in the last 10 years has removed the need to build 2 new power plants. Mm-hmm. The other thing about efficiency is it is comprehensive and it is collaborative with any type of energy source. I like to talk about energy efficiency in a very simple way. I say that when we create energy policy, we're not really making sausage, we're making rice and beans. And the efficiency is really the rice or the long-acting carbohydrate that would sustain us as a society. And the beans are the proteins or the energies like nuclear, fossil fuels, or renewables. And you can write energy policy with any type of beans, right? But if you create a dish and you have the parts that you need, it's going to sustain you longer than if you don't think about how you're creating the dish.
All right. Thank you. My time has expired. I'd like you to expand more, but it's a very important subject. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Now recognizes Mr. Kennedy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today and for the committee for holding this important hearing. I want to thank you also as well for your perspectives and for your leading efforts to develop, promote, and employ a diverse labor force in our growing green economy. I am particularly interested in the development of offshore wind resources. We know offshore wind holds an immense opportunity for abundant renewable energy, and that offshore projects are in the development pipeline. Some report that ISO New England has around 10 gigawatts of offshore wind project development in the interconnection queue. And the lease results from December shows significant interest and potential, particularly off the south coast of Massachusetts, an area that I represent. Locally, there's already an active economic mobilization from businesses to education institutions to civic organizations to ensure that our region is poised to capitalize on that potential. Folks, it is hard to overestimate how promising this is for cities like Fall River and New Bedford, Massachusetts, and for communities like them around the country that have too often been afterthoughts in our modern economy and deserve to have a central seat at the table as these new industries emerge. But domestic offshore U.S. wind development is in its infancy, and as a result, we don't have the robust offshore wind workforce that is needed. I know this is a challenge that we have to tackle locally, and we have tried to tackle locally, and I have a few questions on that piece specifically. So first, this bill seeks to address the critical need for a diverse labor force, and I want to focus on that for a second. Ms. Truong, is that right? Close? Thank you. Forgive me. How do we ensure that our workforce training and development efforts in this emerging sector are inclusive and intentionally targeted populations that most need and most stand to gain from access to these new good-paying jobs?
Well, that's a very good question. And first, I think what we want to start with is how far away are we from developing the offshore wind? We want to time the development and the training of the workforce with the demand of the employers that's going to be upcoming, right? And so once we understand that, how do we make sure then we are reaching out to where the diverse workforce will be? Whether it's in schools, whether it's in middle schools or high schools, how do we begin to provide the on-the-job training, the internships, the apprenticeships necessary as the employers, the offshore wind projects are being developed at the same time? We want to make sure that we actually match the demand with the supply itself. We don't want to train young people, especially in diverse communities, for jobs that won't exist, especially if they're going to be sacrificing other opportunities, the opportunity cost that will entail. At the same time, we don't want them to miss the opportunities that will be presented in itself with the offshore wind projects. So I think matching the supply and the demand of the employers and the employees would be really important there.
And building off that a moment, ma'am, targeting amongst the groups that you indicated, minorities, women, lower income communities, and other populations currently underrepresented in the energy sector, how do we ensure that they have access to the training and employment in that offshore, as we try to bring offshore wind to market?
Education and outreach, making sure that we're going to where the people are, making sure that we're engaging the community-based organizations, the workforce investment boards in the local communities, making sure that we're connecting the investment in the pipelines that the potential employees will be to the jobs, to the job market.
And when you say we, I'm sorry, when we say we, you mean through the design of that legislation and the implementation thereof?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes. And forgive me, Ms. Pramagiori? Close, forgive me. From a utility and resource planning perspective, and Mr. Campbell from the project financier and development perspective, how do we simply put, make these jobs a reality? Ma'am.
Thank you. So we're actually thinking about that right now. Okay. We have a utility in New Jersey, and there is some discussion in that state of offshore wind, and that's not our job to build the turbines. We're a utility, transmission and distribution, but we're thinking through what it takes to take transmission out to those assets and what that looks like from an economic standpoint, what that looks like from a job skill set standpoint. So I think the industry is thinking about this. I think those projects are becoming real. We have the skill sets in the utility, or can build them. They're, for us, the traditional transmission technician skill set and transmission engineering skill set. We just, I think to the point that Ms. Strong was making, to continue that pipeline, make these projects and great opportunities accessible, create awareness around them, and just ensure that we're supporting that pipeline.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, briefly.
Yeah, currently, we don't have the capabilities in wind. We have access to capital as that market matures a little bit. I think via partnerships and/or acquisition would be an area that we could look at. But right now, we're not currently operating in wind.
And what can we do to help in 4 seconds?
Provide opportunities, and the partnerships will come. And I know we talked a lot about job creation, but also small businesses are backbones of our country. And I think part of once you train and learn energy, it's an opportunity like what I did to be able to create your own companies as well too.
Thank you, sir. Yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our panel for being with us today. The world has changed, I think, because I spent 27 years in the Air Force, joined in 73 and retired in 99. And I can remember the day when employers were clamoring to get military folks to come and work for them. It was a big deal at every base that I was stationed at over that nearly 27 years. Employers would offer you a part-time job, whether it was in technology or food service or manufacturing, you name it. How we got into this situation where we are no longer able to tap into that huge talent pool with veterans, with military folks that are exiting their active service is beyond me, and I think Congress should be doing everything that we can do to make it easier for those veterans to utilize resources and to get into the job market. I really wish that we were hearing from the Department of Energy also today, because I know that Secretary Perry has really worked hard to expand veterans programs and increase the communication and collaboration between the VA and the Department of Energy, and that's an issue that I've worked on myself with him. So as Mr. Simpson, as you alluded to in your written testimony, there are already many federal programs for veterans. DOE also works with partners on training and certification programs to assist veterans and active duty service members on their transition into civilian jobs. Do you support this idea of a clearinghouse to consolidate these resources and make them easier to use?
I think, sir, if you look at it, for us, we support anything that develops a better workforce for our industry. I think if you look at the existing platforms that are already available and tap into the resources that are there, and then after doing that, look at how the industry has responded and how people have responded about getting into the industry, then you look at those things, that would make sense.
Okay, all right. Despite the great work already occurring both in government and in the private sector, do you believe specific barriers remain to companies successfully tapping the unique skills and abilities of our veterans within the energy industry? Let's see. Yeah. Such as issues involving transitioning from the military culture to private sector culture, issues with private sector certification requirements, or the need to supplement veteran skills with additional training. In other words, what gaps remain or could be improved upon to make this transition from the military to the private sector most successful for veterans in your industry?
So I'm going to answer that in a couple of different directions. I'm going to start with something I've been meaning to save the majority of the day. Education has been something that we've talked about at this table pretty consistently, and I think that as we educate our educators on interacting with young students, teaching them, right now Department of Education grades our school systems and our educators on how many kids we send to college. As long as we're evaluating the performance of a counselor on how many kids he sends to college and how many kids get into top-tier schools, we're taking people away from the other workforce that may have entered that workforce. Yeah. So educating people about all of the jobs that are available and all of the careers that are available, that would trickle in to the military side. But on the military side, it's access. Give us more access. Give us the opportunity to be on the base, in the community of the veterans, and educate them on what our careers are.
Yeah, well, I think we, and I was going to get into it, but I see I'm not going to have time. I think it is, it's definitely a problem that we've convinced many young people that their only pathway to success is a four-year university. Many of them don't want to do that, don't need that, and we need workers in all the different areas. I'm limited on time, so Mr. Simpson, one final question for you. Why do you think jobs in your industry are attractive to veterans, and do you think it's short-sighted to limit federal programs to only green-collar jobs?
I think that anytime you limit funding to specific industries or jobs, you limit opportunity. So I do think that we look at all of the opportunities that are available. But as far as the industry being attractive to veterans, a lot of us joined the military because we didn't want four walls and fluorescent lights. It's great to be able to work outside and in the elements and with a small team, and we continue that when we leave the military by entering into the energy workforce.
I was raised on a tobacco farm. I love the four walls and the bright lights, so I get that. But thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Berrigan, and before she begins, I want to welcome you as a new member to this subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for having this discussion today and everybody who is here. I've heard a lot just sitting here, and I represent a district in Southern California that includes areas like Compton and Watts, where not everybody is going to college. So bills like this are so critically necessary and important because there is a lot of folks in parts of the country, including my district, who want to have opportunities for jobs where they may not go to college. And so, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for having this conversation, and I think this is a bill that's desperately needed. And you know, the focus of the bill is obviously to move toward clean energy, and that's why the bill language is the way it is. It is because we have a climate change crisis. It is because communities of color and low-income communities are suffering health impacts that is really a public health crisis. And so that is why the language isn't there talking about the oil industry. And that doesn't mean we don't include them in the conversation. As a matter of fact, when I meet with them, oftentimes my conversation with them is, what are you doing to transition? How can we help you transition? And that is the great part about this bill. One of my colleagues from Virginia asked, what's in the bill for people where he is? And Section 202 of the bill is very clear. It prioritizes who is going to benefit from this. So the question is, do you have women in your district? If it does, if you do, this benefits you. If you have persons who are transitioning from fossil fuel energy sector jobs, are they in your district? Well, then they benefit you. Do you have veterans in your district? Because if you do, this bill is going to benefit you and your district. I don't see anything in the bill that restricts money from going to rural areas. I haven't seen anything. Ms. Colon de Mijas, have you seen anything in the bill that restricts money to rural areas?
Absolutely not. I think that the bill is very competently written to ensure that it supports people in urban and suburban areas. And I agree that it would specifically support women and minorities and career changers and veterans. That's the way I read the bill.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Colon de Mijas, can you provide an example from your experience where you have had difficulty hiring staff for an available job and how this legislation would help small businesses like yours?
I currently have 7 positions that are open. Oftentimes, I hire people from those populations and I train them, and then they actually end up leaving about 2 years later to go work for the public utilities because they become such highly skilled workers that they're sought after by other companies and other industries, including solar, electric vehicles. Many of the skills are transferable. So once someone is trained, they would have the opportunity to work in other areas as well, including public utilities.
Right. And why should small businesses get more robust incentives than maybe larger businesses? And do you have an example that supports the distinction?
Yeah, specifically, I hired a veteran 2 years ago who I absolutely loved, but he didn't come with the right skill set because the programs that are available for vets do not allow them to participate in the non-credit education or continued education. So I had to invest in those courses to allow him to get the certifications he needed. And then after he got the certifications, he was rightfully hired by a much larger entity, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protections. And he works there now. But I invested a lot of money in his training, and I also paid him for the job for the 2 years, and then I had to start from the beginning to retrain.
Great, thank you. Ms. Strong, if I can ask you a couple questions. What are some of the key barriers to equal minority representation in the energy workforce? And to follow up, what types of obstacles have you come across, and how can smart federal policy help address those challenges? Your mic. Your mic.
Oftentimes, minority and communities and low-income communities don't get access to these jobs. A lot of times the energy companies and utilities interview and hire people who they may know in their communities, and they may not have outreach to the communities that have not been traditionally seen as candidates in this industry. And so outreach and education, both from the employer side to the communities that otherwise are not included in the conversation, but also investing in the communities that that's seen a traditional disinvestment in education and training programs, and making sure that they're connected now to the new industry that is growing and booming.
Great. Well, thank you. And I want to thank you for making the connection between poverty and pollution earlier in your remarks. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
I want to thank the gentlelady, and the chair now recognize Mr. Wahlberg for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and thank you for the panel for being here today. I'm pleased the committee is holding a hearing on workforce development for the energy industry. As a senior member of the Education and Labor Committee, I've been passionate about and working on these issues for a long time. The Education and Labor Committee actually has primary jurisdiction, so I'll be following this issue closely in the days ahead. Also, my district is the #1 district. It is the energy district of the state of Michigan, with over 35% of all of the energy produced in Michigan produced in the 7th district. It's an all-of-the-above district, everything from wind and solar to natural gas, coal, and Fermi. The only plant recently to receive a license for a third facility. So we are appreciative of this issue. Ms. Pramaggiore, I was taken with the icebox challenge, the refrigerator electrification and racing those refrigerators. It made me think with what's going on in my district with self-driving vehicles, that maybe we ought to have a self-driving refrigerator, so when I'm watching Michigan beat Ohio State, hopefully in the future, I don't have to leave and have the refrigerator brought to my, let's forget that.
I think you'll have some takers for that science project.
Good deal. Let's move that on with young ladies or with young men as well, putting that together. When I was back visiting just this last week, our ISD in Jackson, Michigan, and their Career Center, I saw firsthand what our communities are doing to promote hands-on learning opportunities and create high-schooled, high-wage jobs. I wish this hearing had been held before that. We could have talked about this as well in the energy industry. At Exelon, are you partnering with your local communities similar to the Career Center to collaborate on the workforce development training this bill discusses?
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, we are. We have a number of different programs. We have programs that are designed around workforce development and training, where we partner with community colleges and other community groups to develop these training programs. We also have educational programs, dollars that go to different entities to create educational programs through elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. So we overall in our company spend about $10 million a year on education alone, and then there's a separate funding for training programs themselves.
Okay, thank you. With that in mind, from my understanding, it appears that a lot of what this bill proposes already exists, either by private sector companies like the one Ms. Maynard leads, for instance, or through existing DOE programs. Do you see a need to duplicate these efforts with federal funding? And then second, if so, what should be the role of the federal government?
So what I described was efforts that my company makes and many large companies, and particularly utilities, have experience in. Our industry is changing pretty dramatically, and so what we're seeing is that more and more aspects of the industry are being served by smaller businesses, different kinds of businesses. Mr. Campbell's is one. Ms. Colon de Miejas has another business that works in our industry. Traditionally, this was done by the utility industry, but no longer. These are businesses that need support. These are businesses that don't have the capacity to develop training programs like we do. And yet, I think they have a tremendous impact on communities particularly smaller communities. A small business in a particular neighborhood or community can have an enormous impact, economic impact on that community if you can get them up and running. And so I think that it's, as our industry becomes more fragmented, segmented, and there's more actors and players of different sizes and capacity and capabilities, that this is very important to ensure that those businesses can develop and find workforce and add value.
Okay, thank you. Let me just jump to nuclear power. The Fermi plant in Monroe provides important baseload generation with zero carbon emissions. Is Exelon already partnering with any local career centers or private organizations to ensure skilled workers are prepared for the innovations in the nuclear industry? And is your company leading that way?
Yes, we do. We, as you know, have a number of nuclear plants. We think maintaining nuclear skill sets is absolutely essential to the United States economy, to the United States leadership in nuclear power in general. We fund scholarships for nuclear engineering. We have training programs for nuclear craft skill sets as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I will recognize Mr. McEachin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me start off by thanking you for your leadership.
Let me take a moment just to welcome you to this subcommittee. I want to thank you, and we look forward to working with you, and you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am appreciative of being on this committee as well as this subcommittee. And let me start by thanking you for your leadership in introducing the legislation that we're discussing today. In my judgment, nothing is more important than speeding our transition to a sustainable green-collar economy. As we make that change, we can and must work to ensure that the benefits are widely and fairly shared. We need to ensure that the most direct benefits of our transition, cleaner air, cleaner water, better health, accrue to all Americans. But we also need to ensure that the opportunities in the form of new jobs, community development, and economic growth are broadly shared. And I'll just also say to my good friend of 30 years from Southwest Virginia that I feel you. You and I have worked together for many, many years, and I look forward to that continued relationship and partnership. And would suggest to you that whether it's Petersburg or Southwest Virginia, we're all in the same boat when it comes to trying to get investments in this new collar, this new green collar economy into our districts. Commendably, this bill keeps both of those goals in sight, and I look forward to working with everyone here to ensure that we make the most of this strong foundation and ultimately pass a bill that reflects both the scale of the needs we face and the urgency of the moral imperative to help our most vulnerable friends and neighbors. And Mr. Chairman, along with the work that you've been doing, I discovered an article talking about investment in low-income neighborhoods. Of course, your bill addresses that. But it also seeks to prevent gentrification, which is a thing that I think we need to keep our eye on, because as we improve these low-income neighborhoods, we want the people who have been there all their lives to be able to stay there and to afford to stay there. And that's being handled in certain parts of this country through something called green job zones. And so I would submit this article, if there's no objection, as part of the record. And as far as my questions are concerned, Mr. Campbell, as you've already stated, the transportation sector is now an even bigger source of greenhouse gas pollution than the energy sector, and auto emissions powerfully affect air quality and public health. Can you speak to how we continue to green our transportation system, for instance, by helping facilitate greater use of electric vehicles, and how does this bill help or could it help advance that work?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start first. Again, I go back to collaboration. So utilities around the country are now seeing the benefits of building out the electric vehicle infrastructure that our country desperately needs. I was on a panel recently that Pepco hosted with some of the ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft and even FedEx. They all want to swap their vehicles to electric vehicles, but they can't do so until the infrastructure is put in place. So we need smart policy that will allow for that infrastructure to put it in place. Now, what do the jobs look like, and how does this bill directly correlate to that? You're going to need electricians to install the EV charging stations. Once that infrastructure is put in place, who's going to service these new cars that are different from the past? So part of this training that we haven't really talked about today is also providing grants, because it's hard for people to leave for 5 to 6 weeks, however long a training program is, with no income. And having some level of a grant or subsidy to be able to allow you to go to training is critical, and I commend you all in the way this bill was drafted to be able to provide that support. But I do strongly believe that the greening or the electrification of our transportation sector is one of the biggest opportunities that we're going to see, and it's a lot of work that's being done real time. GM, for example, has 20 new electric vehicles that are rolling out over the next 5 years.
Thank you. Ms. Strong, this bill is designed to help vulnerable communities in large part by helping individual members of those communities. But we need to guard against the danger that in helping certain individuals, we do not simply help them out of their communities, such that their neighbors' lives get better even as their friends and neighbors get left behind. If we do not guard against that possibility, we'll be simply repeating past injustices. We can't do that. So as an example question, how do we ensure that creating clean energy jobs in a given neighborhood does not just lead to that neighborhood being gentrified? What can we do to maximize the extent to which the bill really, truly has its intended effect?
I think we can incentivize and prioritize smart development that has transit-oriented development, clean, green jobs that pays good wages, so that even as people are getting into those jobs, they're able to afford the cost of living in their community. And we can prioritize the investments in helping to create sustainable communities that invest in things like public transit, which is actually good for the environment, actually reduce the cost of living, and at the same time improve the ability for people to pay for the cost of living in their community. So reducing the cost of living and improving the quality of life at the same time. I will say that we do run major campaigns across the country on electric vehicles and the transition to transportation. I'm happy to answer questions on that too.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I think the gentleman now recognize Mr. Hudson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as I said in my opening statement, I've been proud to work with you on this issue for many years.
So have I, Mr. Hudson, and I look forward to working with you as closely in the future.
Great, I appreciate that, and you know, I'm committed just as you are to making sure that we're preparing our workforce, particularly women, veterans, other minority groups, for the future jobs that are going to be out there. Making sure that our education systems are in line so that our folks are in place to take advantage of this new economy, but also to help bring this economy about because we have those skills. And so I do want to respond to my dear friend from California when she said that the scope of this ought to be narrowly focused on green jobs only because of the crisis with climate and so forth and so on. And I certainly look forward to these new technologies coming forth, but I would just hate for us to miss out the people in the workforce, the folks coming into the workforce looking for jobs, and we've got industries with jobs looking for people. And I would just hate for us to narrow the scope on this legislation so much that we miss those opportunities in the meantime. So I look forward to working with you on that, Mr. Chairman. And I would start my first question to Mr. Simpson, who I would like to begin again by saying thank you again for your 25 years of service to this country. It's because of men and women like you willing to serve that we get to enjoy the freedoms we have. So I thank you for that. And I'm proud of the work Pike is doing to hire veterans, and I want to commend you for that. It's a great service to our nation to take care of our veterans because of their sacrifice. As many members of this committee know, I represent Fort Bragg, the epicenter of the universe, one of the largest military installations in the world. The Marines laughing because we also have a large Marine base in North Carolina. But I look forward to any opportunity to support our men and women in uniform, both during and after their service. With that in mind, Mr. Simpson, in your testimony you stated that we're seeing growth of about 14% in the industry, resulting in a need for several thousand new employees annually for the foreseeable future, just to keep up with that demand. With the growth y'all are facing and Pike's Hire Veterans initiatives, I think you've touched on this a little bit before, but could you describe some of the barriers you're facing on the front lines to find potential veterans to hire and train them for the workforce?
Yes, sir, I can. So as I've mentioned several times earlier, the access issue is huge. Just being able to get to the veterans and make sure that they understand what the career opportunities are. But when you look at this as a workforce development issue across the board, gaining access and being able to get into the institutions. I've got veterans that tell me I'd really like to do this, but I've got to support my family. So there's that gap that several people have talked about today that is big. But for us, if we can get into the installation access the service members earlier, establish the skill bridge programs on the base where they can train through that program while they're still active duty service members and being paid by the military with benefits, then we can transition them directly into the energy industry. Right now, the issue is there aren't enough training programs to do that effectively, and that we don't have access to the veterans to get them into the programs.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned in your testimony the Center for Energy Workforce Development. Could you please elaborate on what that center does, and is that what you're talking about now as part of this transition, and sort of talk about what Pike's role is with the center?
So Pike is a member of the Center for Energy Workforce Development. It's a national program, and I think when you look at it, they address several issues. They've got a program called Get Into Energy, which gets into the elementary schools and the lower grade levels to start teaching people about industry jobs at the earliest stages of their education. Later on, when folks leave the military, we have the Troops to Energy jobs that are available. So that program again addresses how to attain those jobs at that point in time. So there are a couple of places where the Center for Energy Workforce Development has really done a really good job of developing pathways and educational programs that can be delivered at any school to teach kids how to get into the industry and get specific certifications to attain industry jobs immediately upon graduation.
Gotcha. Now, are there other specific programs that you've undertaken to access veterans?
Of course, with ours, the apprenticeship program is huge. Being able to tap into a veteran and give them a housing allowance while they're learning the skills to attain our jobs is very beneficial, so we use that.
Well, I'm about out of time, so I'll just again say thank all of our panelists for being here. This has been a very worthwhile discussion. I appreciate your help. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back.
I want to thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. O'Halloran.
I'd like to thank
Mr. O'Halloran. I want to welcome you also to the committee and look forward to working with you.
Same here, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you and Member Upton and other witnesses before us today to join us in this important conversation regarding our nation's energy resources, and to discuss the Blue Collar, Green Collar Jobs Development Act, which is an important first step toward this critical issue for my district. About my district, talking about jobs is important. I have the largest Native American population in the United States in my district. The Navajo Nation has a 50+% unemployment rate. Hopi are at about 80%. The White Mountain Apache, 60+%. One of their towns is at 95% unemployment. San Carlos, 60+%. This has a profound impact on rural America also, since our unemployment rate is higher than urban areas. Mm-hmm. It has an impact on our schools, our fire districts, police, anybody that's concerned with their tax base. We're losing. I have 4 power plants in my district. We're likely to lose one here in the next few months. And so it also is a situation where it affects people that are already in such hardship across Indian land and rural America in general. I hope this hearing is the first of many actions we as a committee take on a key priority of mine, supporting economic opportunity across rural America and Indian country. It's important to note, Mr. Simpson, that with the veterans issue, as a per capita, based on per capita, Native Americans have the highest per capita of service to our country than any other population. Rural America is at a crossroads, as market forces in the energy sector and beyond have drastically changed, and economic realities in communities like those I represent. We must ensure energy workers of all trades are not left behind as the energy marketplace continues to evolve. I cannot understate the unique and dire circumstances and the imminent closures of coal-fired plants like the potential for the Navajo Generation Station, one of the largest coal generation stations in America, present, and what it presents to those communities. The potential loss of hundreds of jobs, the best paying jobs in my district, by far, along with lost operating revenue for those rural and tribal communities, has had devastating implications. This decision today has real implications for real people and real families, and I want to make sure we know that it just isn't theoretical. If we fail to help energy workers, such as those in my district, transition to new opportunities and pay competitive salaries, if we fail to boost economic diversification efforts, then we have failed at our jobs. Whatever the future holds, and for the energy realities of today, we must act now to make sure workers in rural America and across Indian country have every tool to compete and thrive in the new economy. Why is that so important? It's rural America. I think we as a country take it for advantage. I think urban America has to start to understand what rural America is about. And it is about water, where the electricity comes from, natural resources. This is the foundation of our urban centers. They wouldn't survive without what comes from rural America, and rural America can't survive without having the appropriate education, the appropriate jobs available, the appropriate quality of life to keep people there. The transmission lines alone, if we're talking about energy, it's not going to come from the core of our urban centers right now. It's going to come from those areas. And so we have to address that accordingly. I'll move along here quickly. Mr. Simpson, I see in your testimony that Pike Corporation is very engaged in employing and encouraging veterans to contribute to the energy workforce. I thank you. How do you view this legislation's potential to further increase opportunities and flexibility when it comes to energy workforce training for veterans?
As I mentioned earlier, sir, I think any program that gives us the opportunity to educate a workforce and develop a workforce is beneficial. But I do think that we have to look at this against all of the other programs that already exist. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act provides a lot of funding for education. It's simply how that funding is applied and reducing the limitations on that funding to apply to energy programs. I feel like there may be opportunities already in existence to fund some of this, and we may be duplicating an effort. But I love hiring folks into the energy industry, so if you'll train them, we'll hire them.
I think there's a lot more work to do. I look forward to working with my colleagues on that effort, which I believe builds on the important work we have discussed today. Again, I thank the witnesses. I hope we continue this important conversation. Rural America is counting on it. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Flores for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to echo the concerns of my colleagues on this side of the dais that we're not following regular order with today's hearing. We were able to work together on a great bill in the last two Congresses, and I hope that your side of the aisle will continue working with us in a bipartisan manner to address this critical issue for the American people. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement from the Nuclear Power Institute, which discusses nuclear power education, jobs, and careers.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Nuclear Power Institute is located in my district and is a joint center of the Texas A&M Experiment Station and Texas A&M University. This institute works on important workforce issues within the world's leading emissions-free baseload energy technology industry, that being nuclear power. As I mentioned in our last Environment Subcommittee hearing, if we're serious about the threats of climate change, we need to accelerate the deployment of more emissions-free, next-generation nuclear power. In the near term, we should also continue to highlight the climate benefits of lower emissions fuels like natural gas, which have contributed immeasurably to our country's global leadership in emissions reduction. Ms. Maynard, I want to thank you for your testimony and for everything you do for women and increased diversity in the oil and gas industry. And as a fellow Texan and as a former member of the oil and gas industry, I'm pleased for my colleagues to hear your perspectives about our industry and to dispel some of the myths about our industry, and also to talk about the great opportunities it creates for jobs, opportunities, and career development. Over the last two Congresses, I've worked on a bipartisan basis on legislation to streamline the permitting process to modernize our infrastructure, including pipelines. This is good for jobs and paychecks and careers, And if you think about what we're talking today, there's two elements to this. One, we have to educate the workforce, but two, you got to make sure there's a job for that workforce to go to after you've educated them. And so, Ms. Maynard, I'm going to ask you this question on the second part, and that is having the jobs available. Do you agree that it's important for Congress to remove out-of-date permitting barriers so that we can amplify workforce growth, development initiatives, and employment opportunities?
I do.
Oops, yeah.
I do, and I think as my colleague to the left here, Mr. Simpson, has talked about, it sounds like it's very difficult and complicated, the processes and procedures we put in place for veterans, so I would echo support for elimination of complicating the process. If we're going to spend a lot of effort to engage and get people engaged, we absolutely need to make it easier for them to take those jobs and for us to accelerate that process. So yes.
I totally agree with you on both points. That's great. It seems that we could and should do both, so we're creating the right environment where companies can have the confidence to invest in new jobs and new projects and invest in their workforce. You're not just oil and gas. You're talking about expanding to renewables and all forms of energy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Experience energy is about experiencing our energy truly in the fullest form. And it sounds like I need to connect with my colleague to the left here about efficiency, because it's not an area that I was aware of. So
yeah, that's efficiency, a critical part of an emissions control strategy. How would you compare the business climate for energy jobs in Texas along the Gulf Coast compared to the rest of the country?
It's pretty significant. Right now, we are in Texas alone, I speak often to industry about a middle skills gap. We have initiatives already in place in Houston and other areas of Texas where we're trying to find folks to put into jobs. We do have a number of jobs that go unfilled.
Okay. And what would you attribute the difference in opportunity to between Texas and the Gulf Coast and the rest of the country? I'll let you think about that.
I'm going to have to think about that.
Okay. I'm going to go to Ms. Pramaggiore, all right? Would you also agree on the importance of an efficient permitting system for energy infrastructure projects, whether it's for pipelines, for natural gas, or for transmission lines, so that you can get the electrons from where they're generated, either by nuclear or other emissions-free sources like wind and solar, to the consumer?
Yes, thank you, sir. Absolutely. I think that we have an interest in moving forward more quickly on infrastructure build-out. We're very interested in enhancing the infrastructure, modernizing the infrastructure, and extending the infrastructure where need be. And there's certainly we could certainly be moving faster on that.
Thank you. I think infrastructure is really a four-letter word. That's jobs. Thank you. I'll yield back.
I want to thank the gentleman. Now, lastly, we want to recognize Ms. Blunt Rochester, and I just want to make sure that you know that we really looking forward to working with you, and we welcome you to the subcommittee.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to this incredible panel. Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to be here at my first Energy Subcommittee meeting, and really to be discussing a real, bold, and ambitious plan to invest in America's energy infrastructure with a specific focus on ensuring a well-educated and trained, diverse workforce. As the former Secretary of Labor in the state of Delaware and also the founder of the Future Work Caucus here in the House, there is no more important issue at this time for me. And I wanted to also highlight Ms. Pramaggiore. I want to say the whole Giori. Pramaggiore and the work of Exelon and Delmarva in Delaware, because you're working with the Boys and Girls Club, our community colleges, and our HBCU, Delaware State University. And my question is really going to be, the whole panel can pick one. In Delaware, we have a saying, it's good being first because we're the first state. Today, it's tough being last because I'm the last. So I'm going to just give you the three questions I have, and if each of you can take a minute or a second to give an answer, and if not, we can follow up afterwards. So the three questions are, how can we best support small businesses, particularly MBEs and DBEs, as we're looking at the green collar energy future? That's number one. The second is we've talked a lot about different groups that are impacted. but not a conversation about individuals coming out of prison. And I'm really curious about both the challenges and opportunities in the energy sector for individuals coming out of prison. And then the last question, and I'm going to start with Mr. Campbell, and you can pick any of those, but for those of you who have gone into these fields, what great programs did you personally participate in that might become models that we need to expand on? So it's really small business, prison, and your personal journey, things that you would recommend. And I'll start with Mr. Campbell.
I'll try to be as brief as possible. So I've been blessed with wonderful mentors. Green for All / Dream Corps was one of our first mentors when we launched our company. Through a partnership with them, Accenture now became our corporate mentor, and we're doing work across the country with Accenture. Exelon / Pepco is a mentor company. You would think that electric utility and a solar company would be aligned, but we share the same goals as far as making sure our community is moving forward and people have jobs. As far as what are some of the things that this bill and this body can do to support small businesses? I think it's providing procurement opportunities, but holding our feet to the fire. So if we have procurement opportunities, making sure that we're hiring the local community and we're providing mentorship opportunities and creating other small businesses that come behind us. And then lastly, with returning citizens, that's a huge emphasis and something I'm working on. I think a big part of that is just reach back support as well. So once, really preparing people when they're coming out and returning to the society to be successful in jobs, not just to get the job, but to stay in the job. And so that's definitely something that I would hope maybe there be some consideration to include returning citizens as part of this bill.
I'm going to jump to Mrs. Colon. I got to get it right, too.
Colon de Mejias.
Colon de Mejias.
I'm going to shorten my name for the next hearing. My answer is that in order to help small businesses and women-owned businesses, OJT funds are phenomenally helpful. Training support programs are extremely helpful because as a small business, one of the biggest expenses, and I don't know who said it earlier today, that one of our biggest issues is filling those roles and then filling them and worrying about someone taking those people because they need to fill their roles. That's a big problem.
Gotcha. All right, Ms. Trone?
We talked about earlier about wanting to get more women into these industries. Getting my personal journey, I talk to women across this country, women who have a lot of credentials, and they are so intimidated by the STEM barriers. They think they can't talk the science or the math, and they can't get into these areas. So I think demystifying that. I think if we want to increase diversity in small businesses, we can require reporting of how many of our large utilities and businesses actually subcontract or subgrant to smaller diverse businesses. We can also set targets to improve percentage-wise every year. Can we improve 5% every year? And then finally, around prison, we can start training inside of prisons now. We have a shortage of labor, dire problem around the country. We can start training programs inside of prison. We can make sure we provide wraparound services to employers to encourage them to hire people coming out of prison to stop the gap between the hiring processes and then provide wraparound services so that they stay in the jobs.
Thank you. I have 5 seconds. I want to thank Mr. Simpson so much, especially for talking about the workforce investment boards and making sure that we have some coordination across. And also, Ms. Maynard, I want to also say hi to Allie and thank you for bringing her. Thank you so much. I yield back.
I want to thank the gentlelady. The matter before the subcommittee now is a unanimous consent request for the submission of articles and items for the record. And those items include a letter from the Alliance to Save Energy, a letter from Nuke Energy, a letter from the Solar Energy Industries Association, a letter from the Texas A&M University System, a letter from the Center for Energy Workforce Development, and a letter from the National Urban League, and finally a letter, an article rather, from my colleague, Mr. McKinley, an article from entitled "In Minneapolis, Low-Income Neighborhoods See Influx of Clean Energy Jobs." It was Mr. McKeechan, I'm sorry. Mr. McKeechan is the one who requested the unanimous consent decree. Hearing no objection,
We'd like to see, we would prefer seeing a few of these in advance to review them, but yes, of course, we're going to accept in cooperation with you on this. But we'd like to see in the future more to have a chance to review them.
well, certainly the chair will adhere to that request. Thank you so very much. Without objection, so ordered. And we want to make sure that now we thank all the witnesses for your participation in today's hearing. You've given us some very informative, incisive, and exciting testimony, and certainly want to thank you. And I want to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared before us today. And I ask each witness to respond promptly if there are any such questions that you may receive. And so, again, thank you for your participation. And at this moment, the subcommittee now stands adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you. Well, and I'll tell you, we love energy efficiency. We just can't.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Alexander. Oh, great to meet you.
Thank you.
I am. Are you? Oh my gosh. Well, I'm long before you, but oh, that's wonderful.